On my very first day at my new job as a senior forensic auditor, I walked past a cubicle and froze. Sitting right there next to a vanilla latte was a framed photo of my husband of 7 years hugging a 24-year-old junior executive. Instead of screaming, I smiled brightly, pointed at the frame, and asked who the lucky guy was. She squealed and told me all about her upcoming dream wedding in Hawaii. I just nodded, knowing I was about to dismantle their entire lives. I am Sydney, 34 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought I was the financial backbone of a solid marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the ultimate betrayal while quietly plotting your revenge. My firm had just assigned me to conduct a massive internal audit for a prominent medical supply corporation in downtown Chicago. As a forensic accountant, my job was to hunt down missing money, trace hidden assets, and expose corporate fraud. I was used to finding dirty secrets hidden in complex spreadsheets and buried in offshore accounts. I never expected to find my own husband's dirty secret displayed proudly on a mahogany desk on the 14th floor. The marketing department was my first stop for reviewing vendor invoices. The floor was a sprawling layout of glass walls, expensive espresso machines, and eager young professionals buzzing around. That is where I met Paige. She was 24, wearing a designer blazer that cost more than my first car, and tapping away at her keyboard with perfect manicured nails. I approached her desk to request the quarterly marketing expense reports. As she turned to greet me, my eyes landed on the silver picture frame sitting right next to her monitor. The air left my lungs. The ground beneath my sensible heels felt like it was dissolving into nothing. It was Gavin. My Gavin. My husband of 7 years. He was wearing the custom navy blue button-down shirt I had bought him for his birthday just last month. In the photo, he had his arms wrapped tightly around Paige, kissing her cheek while she held up her left hand to show off a massive diamond ring. The background was a luxury resort in Aspen, the exact same resort I had paid for using my annual bonus for our anniversary trip. Only Gavin had told me he had to cancel our trip at the last minute because of a sudden mandatory training seminar for his executive team. A normal woman might have screamed. A normal wife might have picked up that silver frame and smashed it against the pristine glass wall of her cubicle. But I am not a normal woman. I investigate fraud for a living. I am trained to look at a disaster, turn off my emotions, and gather the evidence. So I forced the corners of my mouth up into a wide, enthusiastic smile. "Oh my gosh, is that your fiancé?" I asked, pitching my voice an octave higher to sound like a thrilled new coworker. Paige beamed, completely oblivious to the fact that she was talking to her fiancé's actual wife. "Yes," she squealed, twisting the massive diamond on her left hand so it caught the overhead lights. "His name is Gavin. He is the vice president of operations up on the executive floor. We just got engaged in Aspen last month." I leaned against her cubicle wall, digging my fingernails into my palms so hard they nearly drew blood. "He is handsome," I said, keeping my tone light and breezy. "When is the big day?" Paige could not stop talking. She leaned in like we were already best friends sharing a juicy secret. "Exactly 30 days from now," she whispered excitedly. "We are flying out to Maui for a destination wedding. It is going to be incredible. Gavin is taking care of absolutely everything. He is so generous. He literally just finalized the payments for the beachfront venue and the private caterer this morning. He says he wants me to have the fairy tale I deserve." The irony was sickening, and it tasted like ash in my mouth. Gavin always called me a boring bean counter. Whenever I tried to sit him down to discuss our mortgage or our joint savings, he would roll his eyes, call me frigid, and complain that my obsession with spreadsheets was ruining the romance in our marriage. His mother, Barbara, always encouraged his arrogant behavior. She loved to brag to her country club friends about her highly successful son, while constantly dropping passive-aggressive remarks about how I was just a corporate drone who did not understand how to support a visionary man. He loved playing the big shot, the wealthy executive providing for his family, but I was the one working 60-hour weeks to ensure our financial stability. I was the one who funded the lifestyle he paraded around in. And now he was using my hard-earned money to play Prince Charming to a junior executive 10 years my junior. I even recognized the tennis bracelet Paige was wearing. It was the exact same piece of jewelry Gavin had claimed was lost in the mail when I asked about my Christmas gift. Wow, a beachfront wedding in Hawaii, I replied, maintaining my cheerful facade without missing a single beat. You are a very lucky girl, Paige. I will let you get back to those expense reports. Take your time sending them over. I walked away from her desk with measured, even steps. I did not run. I did not stumble. I walked straight past the glass conference rooms down the long corridor and directly into the women's restroom at the end of the hall. I locked myself inside the largest stall and finally let my breath out in a ragged, heavy gasp. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unzip my laptop bag. Gavin was marrying someone else in 30 days. He worked in the exact same building I was hired to audit. The betrayal was so massive, so incredibly arrogant, it felt entirely surreal. He really thought he could live a double life right under my nose because he assumed I was too boring and too busy looking at numbers to ever look at him. But the forensic accountant inside my brain pushed the blinding grief aside. Paige had said he just finalized the payments this morning. My husband had just made a massive financial move for a wedding I was not invited to. I pulled out my phone and opened our joint banking application. My eyes scanned the recent transactions looking for the usual grocery bills or gas station charges. Instead, a single line of text at the very top of the screen made my blood run completely ice cold. Withdrawal: $60,000. Status completed. I checked the timestamp. The transaction had gone through exactly 5 minutes ago. Gavin was not just planning a fake wedding with his mistress. He was draining our entire life savings in real time to pay for it. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, watching the numbers that represented years of my grueling overtime vanish into thin air. That money was supposed to be for our future house. It was the money I had painstakingly saved, while Gavin bought himself custom golf clubs and expensive watches. A wave of pure, unadulterated fury washed over me, burning away the last remnants of my shock. If Gavin wanted to treat our marriage like a fraudulent corporate account, then I was going to audit his entire life. I took a deep breath, wiped a single stray tear from my cheek, and prepared to make a phone call that would set my absolute revenge into motion. My finger hovered over Gavin's contact name on my screen. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear, listening to the hollow ringtone echo against the cold tile of the corporate bathroom. He picked up on the third ring. Background noise immediately flooded the line, a manufactured hum of distant voices overlapping conversations and the faint clinking of glassware. "Hey babe, I am right in the middle of the keynote speaker session," he whispered, sounding perfectly stressed and flawlessly professional. "Can I call you back in an hour?" "I just met Paige," I said. My voice was a flat, unreadable line. The background noise on his end seemed to glitch. There was a fraction of a second of dead air before he recovered. Paige who? Paige from marketing. The 24-year-old with the massive diamond ring and the framed photo of you two kissing in Aspen on her desk. The one you are apparently marrying in Hawaii next month while you are supposedly on a business trip. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. The sound was so genuinely dismissive, it almost made me doubt my own eyes. "Sydney, are you serious right now? You are actually listening to that lunatic?" "She had a photo of you, Gavin, a photo from our anniversary weekend. She is an intern. She is a deranged stalker who got fired from my department last week." He barked, his voice rising in manufactured outrage. "She downloaded a photo from my social media and photoshopped herself into it. Human Resources has a literal restraining order drafted against her. I am sitting here in Chicago trying to secure our financial future, and you are calling me in the middle of a major conference to accuse me of what a secret double life." I stared at the bathroom sink, gripping the porcelain edge. A photoshopped picture, and the Hawaiian wedding. Delusions. "She is sick in the head, Sydney, but honestly, I am more worried about you right now." His tone shifted instantly from defensive to patronizingly gentle, a toxic pivot I had experienced 100 times before. "You are spiraling again. Your job is way too demanding. You are staring at spreadsheets all day, looking for corporate fraud, and now you are projecting it onto our marriage. You are paranoid and hysterical." $60,000 just vanished from our joint savings account exactly 5 minutes ago, Gavin. Is that a delusion too? He did not miss a single beat. I told you I was moving funds for that commercial real estate investment. I mentioned it to you on Tuesday morning over coffee. You never listened to me. This is exactly what I am talking about. You are losing your grip on reality, Sydney. This is just like last year. I closed my eyes. Do not bring that up. I will bring it up. You screamed at my mother, accusing her of stealing your grandmother's vintage sapphire ring just because you misplaced it. You completely humiliated my family. My mother cried for a week, and then you magically found the ring at the bottom of your own jewelry box. You are losing your mind, and I am sick of being the punching bag for your mental breakdowns. The memory tasted like battery acid in the back of my throat. I had not misplaced that ring. I had found it zipped inside the lining of his mother Barbara's designer purse during Thanksgiving dinner. But Gavin had gaslit me so relentlessly, turning his entire family against me, calling me crazy, until I backed down and apologized just to keep the peace. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. He was using the exact same playbook. Deny the evidence, attack my sanity, and reverse the roles of victim and offender. You are right, Gavin, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy whisper. I must be stressed. Enjoy Chicago. I hung up before he could say another word. I did not cry. Crying was for victims, and I am a senior forensic auditor. I walked out of the restroom, marched down the pristine glass hallway, and sat back down at my temporary desk. I looked across the open floor plan. Paige was still sitting at her cubicle, very much not fired, happily clicking away on her keyboard while sipping her vanilla latte. I opened my laptop. As an external forensic accountant reviewing the corporation's internal structure, I had been granted temporary administrative access to their entire digital network. This included their device management system. Gavin claimed he was at a convention center in Chicago. He claimed Paige was a fired, delusional stalker. I needed digital proof, and numbers never lie. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the standard employee directory and tapped directly into the IT security logs. It took me less than 3 minutes to locate the registered MAC address for Gavin's company-issued smartphone and his corporate laptop. I ran a stealth ping on his current IP address. If he was truly in Chicago, the server routing would reflect an out-of-state network protocol. I watched the green progress bar load on my screen. It was the longest 10 seconds of my life. The location data populated. I read the coordinates, cross-referencing the IP bounce point with the local city grid. Gavin was not in Chicago. He was not even out of the state. The signal was bouncing off a highly secure private Wi-Fi network located exactly 2 blocks away from my current desk. I opened a new tab, typed in the network ID, and hit enter. The search results loaded instantly, lighting up my screen with a high-definition logo. It was not a convention center. It was De Beers, the exclusive luxury jeweler on the corner of 5th and Main. He had just drained $60,000 from our life savings, and he was currently standing in a diamond showroom less than a 5-minute walk from where I sat. The heavy mahogany door of my mother-in-law's estate felt like the entrance to a maximum security vault. I stood on the porch for exactly 10 seconds, smoothing the lapels of my blazer and locking away every trace of the shattered wife. The forensic auditor took the wheel. I had a single sheet of paper folded perfectly in my blazer pocket, the printed ledger showing the massive unauthorized withdrawal from my own life savings. I walked straight into the formal dining room where the weekly mandatory family dinner was already underway. The smell of roasted duck and expensive Cabernet hung thick in the air. Barbara sat at the head of the long table, dripping in old money arrogance, holding court as always. My sister-in-law Alyssa sat to her right, swirling her wine glass and complaining about her personal trainer. Across from her sat DeAndre, Alyssa's husband, quietly cutting his food and maintaining the exhausted silence of a man who knew his words held no value in this house. And then there was the empty chair, Gavin's chair. My poor son is working himself to the bone in Chicago tonight, Barbara announced the moment I pulled out my seat. She did not even offer a greeting. She just leveled a cold, disapproving stare at my work clothes. Meanwhile, you stroll in 20 minutes late, smelling like stale office coffee. A good wife would have flown to Chicago to support him, Sydney. But I suppose your little accounting job is just too demanding. I did not sit down. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the bank statement, and dropped it flat on the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of her crystal wine glass. I am not late because of my job. Barbara, I said, my voice dangerously level. I am late because I was busy trying to understand why your son, who is supposedly working himself to the bone in a Chicago conference center, just drained $60,000 from our joint savings account at a luxury jeweler on Fifth Avenue, exactly 2 blocks from my office. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the shock. The denial, the motherly outrage of a woman discovering her golden child was committing financial ruin. None of it happened. The dining room fell silent, but it was not the silence of surprise. It was the calculated, heavy silence of people who had just been caught, but did not care. Barbara did not even flinch. She slowly reached out with her manicured hand, pushed the bank statement aside as if it were a piece of trash, and picked up her wine glass. She took a slow, deliberate sip. He is making an investment, Sydney, Barbara said, wiping a drop of wine from her lip. You always overreact. If you weren't so frigid and obsessively hovering over your spreadsheets every hour of the day, he wouldn't have to manage the family finances entirely on his own in secret. Men need room to build wealth. You are suffocating him. I stared at her, genuinely wondering if I had misheard. Building wealth. He took $60,000 in cash, Barbara. Alyssa slammed her fork down, rolling her eyes with a theatrical groan. Oh, please, Sydney, stop being so hysterical. You always do this. You act like every dollar Gavin spends is a personal attack on you. You suffocated him when he tried to start that consulting firm 3 years ago, and you are suffocating him now. He is the vice president of operations. He knows what he is doing. Let the man breathe and stop acting like a paranoid lunatic. My chest tightened. They were doing it again. The exact same coordinated gaslighting campaign they had used last Thanksgiving when Gavin crashed my car while intoxicated, and they somehow convinced the entire extended family that my poor maintenance of the brakes was the real cause. They were closing ranks. I opened my mouth to demand answers, to ask exactly what kind of investment required a sudden cash drop at a diamond showroom, but the words died in my throat. The crystal chandelier above the dining table shifted, casting a bright beam of light directly onto Barbara's chest. She was wearing a new necklace. It was a stunning double-stranded set of Mikimoto pearls, held together by a very distinct custom-designed rose gold clasp, shaped like a lotus flower. My forensic memory snapped into hyperdrive. My brain immediately pulled up the images I had spent the last hour reviewing while digging into Paige's public digital footprint. Just yesterday, Paige had posted a photo on her Instagram feed. It was a close-up shot of a velvet jewelry box sitting on a white table. Inside the box was that exact same double-stranded pearl necklace with the custom rose gold lotus clasp. I remembered the caption word for word because it had been burning a hole in my subconscious since I read it. Early wedding gift from my future mother-in-law. I finally have a real family who treats me like a princess. My breath caught. The dining room walls seemed to close in on me. I looked at the pearls resting against Barbara's collarbone. I looked at Alyssa's smug, unbothered face. I looked at the bank statement pushed carelessly to the side. They knew. They all completely, absolutely knew. Barbara was not just covering for Gavin's infidelity. She was actively participating in it. She had welcomed Paige into the fold. She had accepted gifts bought with stolen funds. They were all sitting around this expensive mahogany table, eating a dinner funded by my relentless 60-hour work weeks, while actively helping my husband plan a wedding to another woman in Hawaii. They thought I was nothing more than a blind, easily manipulated bank account. They thought my money belonged to them, and my presence was just a temporary inconvenience until Gavin finalized his exit strategy. I did not scream. The betrayal was too deep, too calculated for tears. A cold, absolute clarity washed over my entire body. I was standing in a room full of financial parasites, and as an auditor, I knew exactly what you do to parasites. You cut off their supply, and you burn their structures to the ground. Alyssa mistook my freezing silence for submission. Sensing an opening, she leaned across the table, her heavy gold bangles clanking against the polished mahogany. She flashed me a tight, predatory smile and immediately launched into a complaint about her upcoming wellness business retreat in Sedona. She casually mentioned that since Gavin was clearly tying up the family capital with his brilliant new investment, I needed to cover her $5,000 deposit. She stared at me with total entitlement, claiming it was my absolute duty as her sister-in-law to support her journey as a female entrepreneur. This was a rich demand, coming from a woman whose entire business consisted of posting blurry yoga videos online and selling essential oils she bought with her husband's credit card. She waved her empty wine glass in my direction, instructing me to transfer the funds to her account by tomorrow morning, so she would not lose her VIP spot at the resort. The sheer audacity of her demand hit me like a physical blow. They were not just stealing my life savings to fund Gavin's secret wedding. They expected me to continue funding their daily luxuries while they actively laughed behind my back. I opened my mouth to tell Alyssa exactly where she could shove her wellness retreat, but I did not get the chance. The sharp, violent crack of heavy silver striking fine china shattered the dining room. DeAndre had dropped his fork. He did not just drop it. He drove it down onto his plate with enough force to splinter the expensive porcelain. Everyone at the table physically jumped. DeAndre is a highly respected pediatric surgeon. His hands are his livelihood, always steady, always perfectly controlled. Right now, those hands were curled into tight, shaking fists resting on either side of his ruined plate. He looked at his wife with a mixture of absolute exhaustion and total disgust. The heavy silence in the room felt thick enough to choke on. "Your business retreat," DeAndre asked, his voice dangerously low and resonant. He did not yell, but the sheer authority in his tone made Alyssa shrink back into her chair. "Do you mean the luxury spa weekend that Gavin explicitly promised to pay for using Sydney's salary?" Alyssa turned bright red. Her mouth opened and closed as she frantically searched for a lie to cover her tracks. "DeAndre, stop it," she stammered, glancing nervously at Barbara. "We can talk about this at home." "We are talking about it right now," DeAndre replied, keeping his dark eyes locked on his wife. "I am sick of sitting at this table week after week watching this family treat Sydney like a human ATM. I know exactly how you fund your lifestyle, Alyssa. I have watched Gavin funnel Sydney's hard-earned paychecks into your failed vanity projects for years, while you sit there and mock her for actually working for a living." Barbara gasped, her hand flying up to clutch the stolen Mikimoto pearls resting against her collarbone. She turned her elite, venomous glare onto DeAndre, her posture stiffening with aristocratic outrage. "Lower your voice in my home immediately," Barbara commanded, her tone dripping with ice. Then came the microaggression, smooth-practiced and designed to cut deep. Barbara looked DeAndre up and down, her eyes full of thinly veiled contempt. She told him that despite his fancy medical degree, he simply did not understand how generational wealth worked. She implied that people from his specific background were too focused on penny pinching to grasp the concept of keeping family capital fluid. She smiled a sickly sweet smile, adding that she could not blame him for his lack of financial sophistication given where he grew up. It was a disgusting, calculated racial dig meant to put him in his place and remind him that despite saving children's lives every single day, he would always be an outsider in her pristine, wealthy world. DeAndre did not yell. He did not lose his temper. He simply smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Generational wealth is a fascinating concept," Barbara DeAndre said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "Especially for a family currently keeping the lights on by spending someone else's paycheck." Barbara's jaw dropped. Alyssa let out an indignant shriek, demanding DeAndre apologize to her mother. Gavin's empty chair sat between them like a ghost, a glaring reminder of the coward who had orchestrated this entire mess. Before Barbara could launch into another toxic tirade, DeAndre's hospital pager beeped loudly from his belt. He pulled it out, checked the screen, and stood up from the table. He slowly buttoned his tailored coat, moving with a quiet, undeniable dignity that made the rest of the people in the room look like petulant children. "I have a level 1 surgical trauma incoming," he announced to the room. He looked down at Barbara. And for the record, your roasted duck is as dry and tasteless as your personality. Have a wonderful evening. Alyssa yelled his name, but DeAndre ignored her completely. He stepped away from his chair and walked around the long dining table toward the front hallway. As he passed behind my chair, I felt him pause for a fraction of a second. His hand brushed against my shoulder in a gesture that looked like a comforting goodbye to the rest of the room. But as his hand slipped away, I felt a heavy folded linen napkin drop silently directly into my lap. He walked out the front door, the heavy mahogany slamming shut behind him, with a finality that made the crystal wine glasses rattle. The dining room erupted into chaos. Barbara began loudly complaining about DeAndre's aggressive temperament, while Alyssa dramatically wiped away fake tears, playing the victim of a cruel husband. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. Under the cover of the tablecloth, my fingers found the folded napkin in my lap. I carefully peeled back the heavy fabric. Tucked inside was a small, torn piece of a hospital prescription pad. Written across the top was a string of numbers that looked exactly like a combination code for a heavy-duty lock. Below the numbers, written in sharp, precise medical handwriting, was a message that made the breath catch in my throat. Gavin does not take his real laptop to work. It is locked in the gray fire safe in my basement. Burn them all. I stared down at the jagged handwriting. The forensic auditor inside me snapped to attention. I had been looking at Gavin's digital footprints, but the real ledger, the unedited truth of his double life and his stolen funds, was sitting on a hard drive in DeAndre's house. DeAndre was not just an ally. He was my inside man, and he had just handed me the keys to Gavin's destruction. I crumpled the prescription paper tightly in my fist, plastering a look of polite concern on my face as I looked up at my horrific mother-in-law. I was going to find that laptop, and I was going to follow DeAndre's instructions to the letter. I waited in my car down the street from Alyssa and DeAndre's house until exactly 1 in the morning. The neighborhood was dead silent, a row of manicured lawns and wealthy facades, hiding God knows how many ugly secrets. When the porch light flicked off and on twice the signal DeAndre and I had hastily agreed upon via a secure messaging app, I slipped out of my vehicle. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin blazer, but the cold kept my mind razor sharp. I moved quickly down the driveway. DeAndre opened the side garage door before I even had to knock. He looked exhausted, still wearing his green hospital scrubs, but his eyes were hard with absolute resolve. He pressed a finger to his lips and pointed toward the ceiling, signaling that Alyssa was deeply asleep in the master bedroom upstairs. We moved silently down the wooden steps into the finished basement. The space was a sprawling monument to Alyssa's discarded vanity projects, filled with stacked boxes of unsold essential oils, untouched yoga equipment, and promotional banners for retreats that never happened. DeAndre bypassed the clutter with practiced ease and walked straight to a heavy utility closet hidden behind a fake built-in bookshelf. Inside the closet, bolted directly to the concrete floor, sat a heavy gray fireproof safe. DeAndre crouched down, his steady surgeon hands spinning the dial with the combination he had written on the napkin. The heavy locking mechanism clicked with a dull, heavy thud. He pulled the steel door open, reached inside, and pulled out a sleek, matte black laptop. He handed it to me without a single word. I set the laptop on a nearby workbench and pressed the power button. The screen flared to life immediately, demanding an administrative password. Gavin was predictable. He thought he was the smartest man in any room, but his arrogance made him fundamentally sloppy. I typed in the zip code of the elite country club his mother belonged to, followed by his birth year and a $sign. The screen unlocked instantly. I am a senior forensic auditor. Give me a device and I will map out your entire life in 10 minutes. I bypassed his standard desktop folders and dove straight into the hidden directories, pulling up the encrypted financial software he had buried under fake system operation files. What I found in those hidden ledgers completely eclipsed a cheap workplace affair. Gavin was not just a cheating husband, he was a federal criminal, and he was actively using me as his human shield. I stared at the spreadsheets, my blood turning to ice water. as I traced the digital money trail. He had established a shell company, a consulting firm registered as an LLC in the state of Delaware. I clicked on the incorporation documents and felt the air leave my lungs. The registered owner, the sole proprietor holding all legal and financial liability, was Sidney Wilson. He had forged my signature, used my social security number, and leveraged my pristine credit score to set up the entire fraudulent operation. Over the past 14 months, Gavin had been systematically embezzling corporate funds from his own employer. He was funneling the money through dummy vendor invoices, approving them in his capacity as Vice President of Operations, and routing the payments directly into the Shell LLC he had created in my name. The total amount embezzled was staggering, $2.5 million. He was not just stealing to fund a new life with his young mistress. He was meticulously framing me for massive corporate fraud. When the corporation inevitably audited his department, the paper trail would bypass him entirely and lead directly to my doorstep. Gavin would play the victim of a deceptive, thieving wife, and I would be facing decades in a federal prison. I clicked into a folder labeled with a simple asterisk. It contained digital copies of passports, luxury real estate listings, and banking regulations for a specific, very deliberate jurisdiction. Belize, a country with absolutely no extradition treaty with the United States for corporate financial crimes. I pieced the entire timeline together in seconds. The extravagant beachfront wedding in Hawaii next month was not just a romantic destination for him and Paige. It was an exit strategy. Hawaii was the perfect geographic staging ground. He planned to marry his gullible 24-year-old intern board, a private flight across the Pacific, and vanish into a tropical paradise with $2.5 million. He would leave me completely blindfolded, holding the bag for millions in stolen funds, facing the FBI alone. DeAndre leaned over my shoulder, reading the screen as the evidence populated. He let out a low, sharp breath, his jaw tightening. "He set you up from the very beginning," DeAndre whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute disgust. "He is going to let you go to federal prison while he drinks cocktails on a beach." I did not answer. My eyes were glued to the top right corner of the screen. A digital calendar notification had just popped up, sliding silently into view over the spreadsheets. It was a scheduled automated task set through a secure encrypted banking portal. Transfer authorization, $2.5 million. Destination Cayman Islands offshore holding account. Execution date, next Friday, 9 a.m. My pulse hammered in my ears. I had exactly 1 week. 7 days before the money vanished permanently into an untraceable offshore account. 7 days before Gavin disappeared, leaving me with a set of federal indictments and a ruined life. My husband thought he had orchestrated the perfect crime because he assumed his boring spreadsheet-obsessed wife would never look closely enough to see the trap closing around her. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had given a forensic auditor full access to his ledger, and I was going to burn his entire world to ashes. I had precisely 96 hours before Gavin's scheduled wire transfer would drain $2.5 million of embezzled corporate funds into an untraceable Cayman Islands account. 96 hours before my husband boarded a plane to Hawaii, married his 24-year-old intern, and left me holding the bag for federal wire fraud. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday operating on pure adrenaline and black coffee, leveraging every resource I had as a senior forensic auditor to prepare my counterstrike. I did not just need to stop the wire transfer. I needed to legally strip him of everything he owned before he even realized he was bleeding. I drafted a highly specific, airtight, irrevocable asset transfer document. Hidden beneath layers of dense corporate jargon, the paperwork legally assigned every single domestic asset Gavin possessed: his luxury vehicles, his private investment portfolios, his executive stock options, and his personal checking accounts directly over to me. It was bulletproof. The only thing missing was his signature in blue ink. When the front door unlocked at 6 o'clock on Thursday evening, I was standing at the kitchen island slicing vegetables. Gavin walked in, dropping his leather overnight bag on the hardwood floor. He looked perfectly refreshed for a man who had spent the last 5 days orchestrating a fake Chicago business trip from a luxury hotel downtown. "Hello, beautiful," he said, walking up behind me and pressing a practiced hollow kiss to my cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne and deceit. Chicago was brutal, but I secured the regional accounts. "I missed you." I set the knife down, turning to offer him a measured, flawless smile. "I missed you too." "How was the keynote speaker?" He did not even blink. "Exhausting. But it is over now." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, printed on heavy bond paper, tossing them casually onto the marble counter. "I actually brought you a surprise to make up for me being away so much lately. I know how stressed you have been with that massive audit. You have been so paranoid and on edge. I wanted to do something nice to help you relax." I looked at the stack of papers. "What is this?" Gavin poured himself a glass of water, leaning against the counter with an effortless, calculated charm. "It is a home equity line of credit. I spoke with the bank this morning. I want to finally remodel this kitchen for you. Give you that massive chef's island you have been begging for since we moved in. The contractor needs a deposit by tomorrow to lock in the summer schedule. I just need your signature on the bottom line since the deed is in both our names." He slid the paperwork toward me and handed me a heavy blue ink pen. My eyes scanned the upside-down text with the terrifying speed of a woman who hunts fraud for a living. It was not a home equity line of credit. It was a quitclaim deed mixed with an aggressive corporate asset reassignment. He had buried a clause transferring my entire equity in our home directly to the exact same shell LLC he had created in my name to launder the embezzled corporate funds. If I signed that paper, he could legally liquidate our house tomorrow morning, add the cash to his Cayman Islands wire transfer, and leave me utterly homeless while the FBI knocked on the door. The sheer arrogance of his plan was breathtaking. He really thought I was just a blind, compliant wife. I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line. Then I let my hands start to shake violently. I took a sharp, jagged breath, letting the pen clatter loudly onto the marble counter. I forced my breathing to turn shallow and erratic, gripping the edge of the island, as if my legs could no longer support my weight. Gavin frowned, stepping forward. "Sydney, what is wrong?" "I cannot do this right now," I gasped, letting hot manufactured tears well up in my eyes and spill over my cheeks. I pressed the heels of my hands against my forehead, playing the exact role of the hysterical, overworked woman he constantly accused me of being. "The audit at work, the numbers are not matching up. I am failing Gavin. I think they are going to fire me. I am losing my mind, just like you said." His posture immediately shifted. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a deep, predatory satisfaction. He loved this. He loved seeing me weak, broken, and entirely dependent on his stability. It validated every gaslighting tactic he had ever used against me. He stepped around the kitchen island and pulled me into a tight, crushing hug. "Shh. It is okay," he murmured, stroking the back of my hair. "I told you that job was too much for you. You are just spiraling again. You are overwhelmed and hysterical. Just let me handle things. I will always take care of you." I buried my face in his expensive tailored shirt, letting my shoulders heave with fake sobs. While his arms were wrapped tightly around my upper back, my hands dropped below his line of sight. My prepared, irrevocable asset transfer document was sitting directly beneath my closed laptop on the kitchen island, printed on the exact same heavy bond paper. Moving with surgical precision, I used my right hand to slide the top pages of his fraudulent quitclaim deed to the left. I slipped my document out from under the laptop and aligned it perfectly over his signature page. I took one more shuddering breath and pulled away from his chest, wiping my eyes with the back of my wrist. "You are right," I whispered, looking up at him with wide, vulnerable eyes. "I am just so stressed. I trust you, Gavin. You always know what is best for our finances. Where do I sign?" He smiled, a soft, patronizing expression of total victory. "Right at the bottom, sweetheart." I picked up the blue pen. I signed my name flawlessly on the designated line of my own document. Then I slid the stack of papers across the marble counter toward him and held out the pen. "Your turn." Gavin did not even glance at the text. He was too high on the adrenaline of his perceived brilliance. He was completely blinded by his own arrogance and my perfectly executed breakdown. He took the pen, leaned over the counter, and signed his name in bold, looping letters directly onto the dotted line of the irrevocable asset transfer. He had just legally signed away every dime of his domestic wealth. "There we go," he said, capping the pen and pulling me back into his arms for another comforting embrace. "See? Everything is going to be perfect." I rested my chin against his shoulder. Over his back, I could see our reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. Gavin was staring over my head, a cold, ruthless smirk twisting his features. He thought he had just stolen my home and secured his tropical getaway. I slowly wrapped my arms around his waist and smiled warmly into his chest. The trap was set. The morning after Gavin blindly signed his financial death warrant, I walked into my downtown office feeling an unfamiliar, intoxicating sense of absolute control. The irrevocable asset transfer was already resting safely in a fireproof filing cabinet at my lawyer's office, a silent ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. The digital locks on Gavin's private investment portfolios and checking accounts were quietly engaging behind the scenes, initiated by the legal authority he had literally handed to me. He was officially a man with no assets, a ghost in the financial system, though he would not realize it until the trap snapped fully shut. I sat at my desk reviewing the final audit protocols for my corporate clients, my mind running complex calculations on exactly how and when to drop the final hammer on his shell company. My focus was unbreakable until the heavy glass door of my suite swung open with violent, disruptive force. Alyssa marched into my office without knocking, completely ignoring the frantic protests of my administrative assistant trailing behind her. She was wearing designer activewear that cost more than my monthly car payment, a massive iced coffee clutched in one hand, and a counterfeit Birkin bag slung aggressively over her shoulder. She slammed the heavy oak door right in my assistant's face, flipped the privacy blinds closed with a sharp flick of her wrist, and turned to glare at me with total entitlement. "You did not transfer the funds," Alyssa spat, planting both hands flat on my desk and leaning over my monitors. Her voice was sharp, demanding, and completely devoid of the fake syrupy sweetness she used around our mother-in-law. "I checked my account this morning, Sydney. The $5,000 for my Sedona business retreat is missing. I explicitly told you I needed that deposit by today to secure my VIP spot." I leaned back in my leather chair, slowly steepling my fingers together. "I am not funding your luxury vacation, Alyssa. My paycheck is not your personal slush fund. If your wellness business is so remarkably successful, you can use your own revenue to pay for your spa weekends." Alyssa's eyes narrowed into angry, venomous slits. She took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest, trying desperately to project an aura of authority she simply did not possess. "You are making a massive mistake, Sydney. Gavin already told you to cover this expense. If you do not wire me that money right this second, I am going to call my brother and tell him exactly how you are behaving. I will tell him you are acting paranoid, hostile, and incredibly suspicious. He already thinks you are losing your mind with work stress." "Do you really want me planting the idea that you are hiding things from him?" It was a blatant extortion attempt, clumsy, desperate, and remarkably stupid. She thought the threat of Gavin's disapproval would make me fold, just like it always had in the past when I was trying to keep the peace in this toxic family. But she was threatening me with a man I was actively preparing to obliterate. "Call him," I said, my voice deadpan and entirely unbothered. "Tell him whatever you want. The bank is permanently closed to you, Alyssa." Her face turned a mottled, furious shade of red. She grabbed her iced coffee and stormed out of my private office, throwing the door wide open so it hit the wall with a loud crack. But she did not leave the building. Instead, she stopped dead in the center of the main lobby, directly in front of the reception desk and a dozen of my working colleagues. "You are a cheap, pathetic excuse for a wife," Alyssa screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the corporate marble floors. My coworkers froze, staring in total shock at the unhinged woman throwing a massive tantrum in a highly respected accounting firm. I stepped out of my office, maintaining absolute composure as I walked slowly toward her. "You sit here crunching numbers all day while ignoring your own husband," she yelled, gesturing wildly toward the open floor plan where my analysts were sitting in stunned silence. No man will ever respect a woman who puts spreadsheets over her family. No wonder he's looking elsewhere. You are completely useless. You contribute absolutely nothing to the legacy of our family. You embarrass us with your pathetic penny pinching, and you absolutely deserve to be replaced by someone younger, prettier, and actually willing to support a successful man. She was practically vibrating with malicious joy, flaunting her insider knowledge of Gavin's hidden affair right in the middle of my workplace. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted me to shrink away in embarrassment and beg her to quiet down. I did not shrink. I closed the distance between us until I was standing mere inches from her face. The sheer, terrifying coldness in my eyes made her mouth snap shut mid-sentence. I lowered my voice to a razor-sharp whisper that only she could hear, slicing through her arrogant bravado like a scalpel. "You want to talk about being useless and replacing things?" I asked softly, watching her pupils dilate with sudden uncertainty. "Like how you secretly drained the entire college fund DeAndre set up for your two children just so you could buy yourself that brand new Tesla, the one you proudly claimed was a gift from a non-existent brand sponsor." Alyssa actually stopped breathing. The color completely vanished from her face, leaving her pale and visibly trembling. She opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. "Did you really think a forensic auditor would not notice a missing $80,000 moving through a joint family account?" I leaned in closer, dropping the final devastating blow. "DeAndre knows, Alyssa. He found the withdrawal paperwork hidden in your safe. He knows you stole your own children's future to fund your vanity." Absolute, unadulterated terror washed over her features. DeAndre was her meal ticket, her status symbol, and her only connection to actual legitimate wealth. The sudden realization that her respected, highly intelligent husband knew about her ultimate betrayal shattered her completely. Her fingers went limp. She dropped her heavy iced coffee. The plastic cup hit the marble floor, bursting open and splattering brown liquid across her expensive shoes. She spun around and sprinted out the front glass doors, fleeing the building in absolute panic without looking back once. I stood in the lobby, the adrenaline singing a victorious melody in my veins. My colleagues were still staring, but I simply offered the receptionist a polite, apologetic smile and calmly asked maintenance to bring a mop to the front desk. I had never felt so powerfully in control of my own life. I had completely neutralized Alyssa and legally stripped Gavin of his entire safety net. The endgame was perfectly flawlessly aligned. Then, a sharp, urgent vibration in my blazer pocket broke my focus. I pulled out my phone expecting a panicked, backtracking text message from my sister-in-law. Instead, a bright red banner notification from my personal banking app dominated the screen. "Fraud alert. Authorized user successfully added." I tapped the alert, the blood running cold in my veins. Gavin had just logged into my primary high-limit credit card account. He had not just made a standard transaction. He had legally added a secondary cardholder, bypassing my security questions to grant them full, unrestricted access to my $50,000 personal credit line. The name printed on the new authorized card stared back at me in stark digital letters. Paige Monroe. My husband had just handed his 24-year-old mistress the keys to my personal credit line. Below the authorization notice, a second alert chimed loudly in the quiet lobby. The first charge had already hit the pending transactions. 2 first-class one-way tickets to Honolulu, Hawaii. The countdown had just accelerated. The notification glowed on my screen, a bright red banner declaring that Paige Monroe had just authorized 2 first-class tickets to Honolulu on my personal credit line. Gavin had clearly assured his 24-year-old intern that my high-limit platinum card was simply one of his secondary business accounts. His audacity was staggering, but his sheer arrogant stupidity was going to be his ultimate downfall. I did not freeze the account. Not yet. I had a much more entertaining, deeply public plan for Paige. I packed my briefcase, walked out of my corporate office with a serene smile on my face, and drove straight to an abandoned industrial park on the gritty edge of the city. DeAndre was waiting for me in his parked SUV, safely hidden from the prying eyes of our country club-obsessed family. I slipped into his passenger seat, bringing the cold air in with me. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile breaking through the absolute exhaustion etched into his features. Alyssa just called me sobbing hysterically, he said, his voice calm and resonant. She claims you ambushed her in your lobby and threatened her life. I merely gave her a financial update regarding her own reckless spending, I replied, smoothing my skirt. I assume she did not mention the $80,000 she embezzled from her own children. DeAndre's smile vanished, replaced by the cold, precise focus of a surgeon about to perform a critical operation. She did not. But her lies no longer matter. I am done playing her game. He reached into his heavy leather messenger bag and handed me a thick manila envelope. I have not just been gathering evidence for your war, Sydney. I have been meticulously orchestrating my own exit strategy. I pulled the heavy stack of papers from the envelope. The front page bore the official blue stamp of a family court judge. DeAndre had filed for divorce 3 days ago. He explained that he had presented the undeniable financial theft, along with detailed evidence of Alyssa's erratic, neglectful behavior toward their kids, to a judge in a closed emergency hearing. As a highly respected pediatric surgeon, DeAndre possessed an unimpeachable reputation, a stark contrast to a woman whose only discernible skill was spending stolen money. He had already secured temporary full physical custody of their children and an immediate freezing order on all remaining joint assets. I am serving her the papers on Friday morning, he stated, his dark eyes locked onto mine. Right when Gavin thinks he is boarding a plane to make his grand escape. We burned them both to the ground on the exact same day. I handed him the printed confirmation of Gavin's signature on the irrevocable asset transfer. DeAndre reviewed the document, his eyebrows raising slightly before he let out a low, impressed whistle. You legally stripped him of every single dime he owns, while he was literally hugging you in your kitchen, he noted, sounding thoroughly amazed. He has absolutely zero liquid capital left. The only money he has access to is the stolen corporate funds sitting in that fraudulent shell company. And he will not have that for long, I replied, pulling my laptop from my bag. We spent the next hour sitting in the freezing car, seamlessly merging our digital files. DeAndre provided the time-stamped photographs of the safe contents and the encrypted hard drive backups he had extracted from Gavin's hidden device. I compiled my own extensive forensic audit logs, clearly highlighting every single forged vendor invoice, the fake LLC incorporation documents bearing my forged signature, and the scheduled Cayman Islands offshore wire transfer. I opened a highly secure encrypted connection on my laptop right there in the passenger seat. As a licensed senior forensic auditor, I possess direct priority reporting credentials to federal regulatory agencies. A standard fraud report from a civilian might sit in a bureaucratic queue for months. A fully documented, mathematically verified dossier from a certified professional triggers immediate, devastating action. I submitted the entire $2.5 million embezzlement package simultaneously to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division. I clicked the submit button and watched the progress bar hit 100%. The federal government was now actively hunting my husband, and he was completely oblivious. With Gavin's criminal destruction mathematically and legally guaranteed, I turned my attention back to my immediate petty revenge. My phone buzzed loudly in the cup holder. Paige was apparently on a shopping spree. A new pending charge appeared for an elite appointment-only bridal boutique downtown. She was actively buying her wedding dress using my personal credit limit, preparing to marry my husband on my dime. I opened my banking application, navigating straight to the advanced fraud protection settings. I did not cancel the card. A simply canceled card just gets a polite decline message at the register. Instead, I engaged a maximum security theft protocol designed for extreme situations. I flagged the platinum card as stolen by an unknown physically threatening assailant. The next time that magnetic strip was swiped at a physical terminal, the bank's automated system would instantly lock the account, flash a silent alarm to the merchant, and automatically dispatch local law enforcement to the store's location under a suspected felony theft code. I smiled, watching the pending boutique charge hover on my screen. Paige was out there right now, parading around in imported white silk, playing the wealthy, untouchable bride-to-be. She was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to steal from a woman who controls the ledger. The Oak Brook Country Club was exactly the kind of pretentious velvet-lined establishment Gavin had always claimed I lacked the social grace to navigate. He spent years telling me my wardrobe was too practical and my conversation too analytical for his elite circles. Yet here I was walking through the grand mahogany doors in a razor-sharp charcoal suit armed with a clipboard and my federal auditing credentials. The event manager practically bowed when I flashed my badge and explained I was conducting a routine corporate verification on the primary funding account for the Monroe event in the sunroom. I slipped into the back of the private banquet hall completely unnoticed. The room was dripping in white orchids and crystal centerpieces. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner. Around the room sat dozens of well-dressed guests, mostly older couples dripping in old money jewelry. Paige Monroe's wealthy, oblivious parents sat at the head table beaming with pride. They clearly thought their precious 24-year-old daughter had landed a highly successful divorced executive. Gavin stood up tapping a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The room quieted immediately. He looked immaculate in a navy-tailored suit wrapping his free arm around Paige's waist. She was wearing the imported white silk she had purchased yesterday. "I want to thank you all for being here today, Gavin," began his voice projecting the perfect blend of humility and manufactured charm. "The past few years of my life have been a dark, emotionally draining transition. I was trapped in a situation completely devoid of love or support. But then Paige walked into my office. She brought light back into my world. She showed me what it means to be truly seen, and she is without a doubt my absolute true soulmate." To Paige. The room erupted into applause. Paige blushed, kissing him deeply while her parents dabbed their eyes with linen napkins. I stood by the service doors, my face a mask of stone, simply watching the performance. He had sold them an entire fictional tragedy where I was the cold, neglectful ex-wife, all while currently living in my house and actively plotting to steal my life savings. As the toast concluded and guests returned to their mimosa glasses, the event manager approached the head table carrying a leather folio. It was the final catering invoice padded heavily with vintage champagne and imported caviar. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. The timing was absolute perfection. Paige smiled brightly at the manager reaching into her designer clutch. She pulled out the silver platinum card bearing my name, the one Gavin had illegally authorized her to use, and placed it confidently into the folio. The manager stepped back, pulling a mobile card terminal from his apron. He inserted the chip. I watched the tiny screen from across the room. It processed for 3 seconds. Then it flashed a violent, aggressive red. The manager frowned, tapping the screen. He pulled the card out, wiped the chip on his apron, and inserted it again. The machine let out a sharp, continuous warning tone that cut through the soft jazz music. The manager stared at the screen, all the color draining from his face. The terminal was explicitly instructing him to retain the stolen card and immediately contact local law enforcement under a felony fraud alert. "Excuse me, miss." The manager stammered, his hands visibly shaking as he looked down at Paige. "This card has been flagged as stolen. The system has automatically locked the terminal and requires us to confiscate the physical card." Paige laughed, a high, nervous sound, looking at Gavin. "That is impossible. It is a corporate account. Gavin, tell him to run it again." Gavin stepped forward, puffing out his chest to intimidate the service worker. "Look, there is obviously a machine error. Run it manually, or I will call your general manager and have you fired." "He will not be running it again," I said. My voice sliced through the banquet hall, clear and completely unwavering. Every head in the room turned toward the service doors. Gavin froze. His confident posture shattered instantly, his eyes widening in sheer unadulterated panic as I walked slowly and deliberately across the expensive oriental rug toward the head table. I stopped directly next to the trembling event manager. I calmly reached over and pulled my platinum credit card out of his terminal. "I am the primary account holder," I announced, addressing the manager, while keeping my eyes locked on Gavin. "This woman is committing identity theft and wire fraud. You did exactly the right thing by triggering the security protocol. Paige stood up, her face turning crimson. Who the hell do you think you are? Security. Get this crazy woman out of my engagement party. She is harassing us. Her mother, a woman dripping in diamonds, stood up indignantly. Gavin, who is this woman? Why is she holding Paige's card? I did not give Gavin a chance to construct another lie. I turned directly to her parents, extending a polite professional smile. I am Sydney Wilson, I said, making sure my voice carried to the back of the silent room. I am Gavin's wife. We live together in the house he left this morning. He is not divorced. He is not separated. He is currently under federal investigation for embezzling $2.5 million. And he is using my stolen credit cards to fund your daughter's fraudulent wedding. The collective gasp in the room was deafening. Paige let out a piercing shriek, dropping her champagne flute onto the floor where it shattered into 100 pieces. Her father's face turned purple as he turned a murderous glare onto Gavin. Gavin lost his mind. The carefully constructed, charming executive vanished, replaced by a desperate, trapped animal. His face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He lunged forward, reaching aggressively across the table to grab my arm. "Shut your mouth," he hissed, his fingers digging painfully into my blazer sleeve, trying to physically drag me toward the service exit before I could completely destroy his remaining credibility. "You are insane. I am taking you out of here right now." He pulled violently, but I did not even stumble. Before Gavin could take a second step, a massive shadow fell over us. DeAndre stepped seamlessly out from the crowd of horrified guests. He had walked in through the side entrance 3 minutes behind me, perfectly timing his intervention. He did not yell. He did not throw a punch. He simply clamped his massive, steady hand over Gavin's wrist and squeezed with the precise, punishing force of a surgeon who knows exactly how much pressure it takes to snap a bone. Gavin let out a sharp gasp of pain, releasing my arm instantly as DeAndre physically stepped between us, completely blocking my husband like a stone wall. "Take one more step toward her," DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a low, icy frequency that sent a shiver through the entire room. "And I promise you will not walk out of this country club on your own 2 feet. DeAndre released his iron grip with a forceful shove that sent Gavin stumbling backward into a towering floral arrangement. White orchids rained down on his expensive shoes. The entire banquet hall was dead silent, the kind of silence that precedes a devastating storm. The wealthy guests stared, champagne flutes suspended halfway to their mouths, completely paralyzed by the implosion of the Monroe family's grand social event. Before Gavin could regain his footing or attempt another pathetic lie, the heavy mahogany doors of the sunroom swung open again. Barbara marched through, practically vibrating with indignant upper-crust fury. My mother-in-law had clearly arrived late for the engagement brunch, but her timing could not have been more dramatically perfect. She was wearing a tailored Chanel suit, her pearls clacking against her chest as she took in the scene. She took one look at her golden boy picking crushed orchids off his lapels, saw DeAndre standing like a sentinel, and then locked her venomous gaze on me. Barbara did not hesitate. She swept past the frozen event manager and positioned herself protectively in front of Gavin, turning her most polished aristocratic smile toward Paige's horrified parents. "Richard, Eleanor. I am so incredibly sorry for this disruption," Barbara announced, her voice dripping with practiced syrupy condescension. She gestured toward me as if I were a piece of trash that had blown in from the golf course. "This woman is Gavin's estranged ex. She is severely mentally ill and has been stalking him for months. We have been trying to handle this quietly to protect her dignity, but she simply refuses to sign the divorce papers or accept that Gavin has moved on to a woman of actual class and substance. She is having a total psychotic break." Paige let out a dramatic, victimized sob, burying her face in her hands. Her mother, Eleanor, immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter, glaring at me with newfound disgust. Richard Page's father straightened his posture, clearly relieved to have an explanation that preserved his family's social standing. He looked at me with cold, dismissive authority. "Young Lady," Richard said, puffing out his chest, "I suggest you leave this club immediately before I have the police arrest you for trespassing and harassment. My daughter's engagement will not be ruined by a delusional, bitter ex-wife who cannot accept reality." I did not scream. I did not raise my voice, nor did I defend my sanity. Arguing with a narcissist's enabler is a waste of oxygen, and I had come far too prepared to engage in a screaming match. Instead, I simply unclasped the brass lock on my leather briefcase. I completely understand your concern, Richard. I said, my voice eerily calm and pleasant, echoing clearly across the hushed room. As a father, you absolutely should be protecting your daughter from financial predators and delusional liars, which is exactly why I brought this for you. I pulled out a sleek black presentation folder and extended it directly toward him. Richard hesitated, glancing at Barbara, but his cutthroat business instincts won out over country club politeness. He snatched the folder from my hand and flipped it open. Barbara scoffed, rolling her eyes and waving her hand dismissively. Richard, do not indulge her paranoid fantasies. She probably printed out fake emails. She has been obsessed with ruining Gavin ever since he realized she was entirely unfit to be part of our family's legacy. I kept my eyes entirely on Richard, watching his ruddy complexion drain to a sickly pale gray as he read the first page. That is a certified, legally binding summary of Gavin's current financial portfolio. I explained, my words dropping like ice cubes onto the marble floor. You will notice the multiple maxed-out credit lines, the defaulted personal loans, and the second mortgage he secretly took out on the house I own and just legally transferred out of his reach. He is currently drowning in roughly $400,000 of high-interest consumer debt. He does not have a single liquid asset to his name. Gavin lunged forward, his face panicked and slick with sweat. Richard, do not look at that. It is completely fabricated. She is a forensic auditor. She manipulated those documents to frame me. Richard ignored him, flipping to the second page with trembling fingers. His eyes widened behind his expensive reading glasses as he scanned the official corporate letterhead. And that second document, I continued maintaining my conversational tone, is an official notice of suspension from his corporate board of directors. It was issued yesterday afternoon. Gavin is officially unemployed, barred from the company premises, and currently the subject of an internal investigation for gross financial misconduct. He is a broke, unemployed fraud who is planning to use your family's wealth to pay off his impending legal fees and fund this ridiculous party. Richard slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. He turned to Gavin, his face contorted with absolute rage. You are suspended, Richard barked, stepping toward my husband. You sat in my study last week and told me your firm was grooming you for the CEO position. You asked me to front the deposits for a luxury destination wedding because your capital was temporarily tied up in high-yield offshore investments. You told me you were a multimillionaire. Gavin threw his hands up, backpedaling away from the furious patriarch. Richard, please, you have to listen to me. It is a temporary misunderstanding at the firm. I am being targeted by jealous partners who want my accounts. I have the money. I promise you I have the capital to cover everything. Not with my daughter, you do not. Richard roared, slamming his fist onto the head table, violently rattling the crystal centerpieces. The wedding is permanently off. Every single vendor is getting canceled today. I am not funding a grand illusion for a bankrupt con artist. Paige, gather your things. We are leaving right now. Paige wailed, clutching Gavin's arm, her perfect silk dress crumpling in her grip. Gavin, tell him. Tell him you have the money. You promised me we were buying the estate in Aspen. You promised me. Gavin was completely unspooling. The meticulously crafted mask of the successful dominant executive was gone, leaving only a desperate cornered thief watching his only remaining safety net burn to ash before his eyes. He gripped Paige's shoulders, his eyes wild and frantic, making the fatal, irreversible mistake I had been waiting for. Paige, baby, you have to believe me. Gavin pleaded, his voice cracking with pure desperation. I am not broke. The suspension means nothing. I have a massive payout coming. $2.5 million. It is hitting my private accounts next Friday. I swear to you, next Friday we will have more money than your father does. Just wait until Friday. I stood perfectly still, my heart hammering a victorious rhythm against my ribs. Next Friday. He had just handed me the exact, precise timeline of his offshore wire transfer. I knew the amount, I knew the routing strategy from my forensic audit, and now, thanks to his desperate need to keep his rich fiancée from walking out the door, I knew the exact date the stolen corporate funds would move. Richard grabbed Paige's arm, physically tearing her away from Gavin. "You will not speak to my daughter ever again. If you come near my family, I will personally see you buried in litigation so deep you will never see daylight." As Paige's family stormed out of the sunroom, followed closely by a herd of whispering, scandalized guests, fleeing the sinking ship, Gavin stood alone amidst the ruined orchids and spilled champagne. Barbara rushed to his side, frantic and confused, demanding to know what he meant about $2.5 million and a suspension. I looked at DeAndre. He gave me a single, slow, satisfied nod. The extraction was complete. I turned and walked out of the country club, into the bright afternoon sun, leaving my husband and his mother to drown in the wreckage of their own making. The federal authorities already had the audit. The divorce papers were ready to be served. And now the final countdown to next Friday had officially begun. The silence inside our marital home was absolute when I unlocked the front door. The adrenaline from the country club confrontation had cooled into a sharp, crystalline focus. I knew Gavin would not simply accept his public humiliation and financial ruin. A cornered narcissist does not surrender, they escalate. Anticipating his next desperate move, I walked directly to the living room mantel and adjusted the angle of the high-definition security camera I had discreetly installed 2 days prior. I synced the live feed to my secure cloud server, poured myself a glass of iced water, and sat in the leather armchair to wait. 45 minutes later, the front door burst open. Gavin did not storm in alone. He was accompanied by Dr. Arthur Vance, an aging, overly tanned psychiatrist who had been Barbara's primary country club confidant for over a decade. Gavin's navy suit was severely wrinkled, his tie yanked loose, and his hair disheveled. He was breathing heavily, casting a frantic, wild gaze around the foyer until his eyes locked onto me. Instantly, Gavin's manic expression morphed into a mask of deep, manufactured sorrow. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, treating me like an unexploded bomb. "Sydney, sweetheart, please stay calm," Gavin murmured, his voice dripping with an artificial, sickeningly sweet concern. "Dr. Vance is here to help you. We just want to get you the care you so desperately need." Dr. Vance stepped forward, setting his heavy leather medical bag onto the coffee table. He looked at me with the practiced, condescending pity of a man entirely accustomed to diagnosing women with hysteria to suit the financial needs of wealthy husbands. "Sydney, Gavin and his mother have shared some very troubling reports regarding your recent behavior." Dr. Vance began lacing his fingers together over his tailored waist. "Trespassing at private events, exhibiting severe paranoia, fabricating grand financial delusions. These are classic signs of a severe psychotic break. You are suffering from acute stress-induced mania. For your own safety, I am preparing the paperwork for an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. We have a private, discreet facility ready to intake you immediately." It was a breathtakingly malicious strategy. Barbara and Gavin had realized that if they could not discredit my evidence, they needed to completely discredit the source. If I were legally committed to a psychiatric ward by Friday, I would be entirely incapacitated. Gavin could execute his offshore wire transfer and vanish with his intern, leaving me locked in a padded room, stripped of my legal autonomy and professional credibility. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced water and set the glass down on a coaster. "Dr. Vance." I stated, my tone devoid of any emotion. The legal threshold for an involuntary psychiatric hold in this state requires the patient to present an imminent physical danger to themselves or others. Exposing my husband's $2.5 million corporate embezzlement scheme at an engagement party does not meet the criteria for a medical emergency. "You are clearly experiencing a detachment from reality." Dr. Vance sighed, shaking his head and reaching into his bag for a syringe. "We are going to administer a mild sedative to help you transition to the facility smoothly. Gavin, I will need you to hold her arms steady." Gavin took a step forward, his eyes flashing with a predatory, desperate malice. I smiled. It was a cold, utterly terrifying smile that stopped Gavin dead in his tracks. "Before you cross that rug, Arthur, I highly recommend you look at the blinking green light on the mantelpiece," I said smoothly. Dr. Vance frowned, his gaze snapping to the small camera hidden among the framed photographs. This entire interaction is currently being recorded and live-streamed directly to a secure federal cloud server, I explained, watching the blood rapidly drain from the doctor's overly tanned face. It is also being simultaneously monitored by my attorney. If you attempt to inject me with an unprescribed sedative or falsify medical documents to facilitate my husband's flight from federal prosecution, you will not just lose your medical license. I will personally ensure you face a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit medical fraud, assault, and aiding in a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Dr. Vance froze, the syringe trembling in his hand. He looked from the camera to me and then turned a look of absolute horror toward Gavin. "You told me she was having a breakdown." Dr. Vance hissed, his professional facade completely shattering into sheer panic. "You said she was destroying your house and threatening self-harm." "You lied to me, Gavin." "Arthur, wait," Gavin stammered, reaching out. "She is bluffing. It is a fake camera." "I am not going to prison for your marital problems," Dr. Vance shouted. He threw the syringe back into his bag, snapped it shut, and sprinted for the front door. He did not look back once as he fled down the driveway, his tires screeching as he sped away from the property. The heavy oak door slammed shut, leaving Gavin and me completely alone in the silent house. The performance was over. The concerned husband vanished entirely. Gavin's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. His chest heaved as the reality of his trapped situation fully materialized. His mother's plan had failed. His wedding was canceled. His career was over. And his victim was sitting calmly in a leather chair, holding all the keys to his destruction. "You arrogant, vindictive witch!" Gavin roared, his voice cracking with rage. He paced erratically across the living room, tearing his hands through his hair. "You think you have won. You think you are so brilliant. You are nothing but a bitter, obsessive spreadsheet cruncher who could not keep a man happy." He spun around, grabbing a heavy imported crystal vase from the entryway table. It was a wedding gift from Barbara, an ostentatious heavy piece that he had always prized. With a guttural scream, Gavin hurled the vase directly at the hardwood floor between us. The crystal exploded with a deafening crash, sending thousands of sharp, glittering shards flying across the expensive rug. He stood panting over the wreckage, his fists clenched, waiting for me to flinch, waiting for me to finally show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I did not flinch. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I looked down at the shattered glass glittering in the afternoon light, and then I raised my eyes to meet his furious, sweating face. "Have a great trip to Hawaii, Gavin," I said coldly. Gavin stopped breathing. His jaw went completely slack. The color vanished from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out ghost. He stared at me in sheer, absolute terror as the devastating realization hit him. I knew about the intern, I knew about the credit card, and I knew exactly what flight he was planning to take. For exactly 10 seconds, the silence in the living room was absolute. I watched his mind furiously scrambling, trying to calculate how much damage I could actually do before Friday. I knew that if I pushed him into a state of total panic right now, he might flee the state tonight, scattering the offshore funds before the federal freeze could fully engage across all international banking sectors. I needed him to stay exactly where he was. I needed him complacent. I needed to feed his massive, fragile ego. So I played my final psychological card. I let my shoulders slump forward, instantly deflating my posture. I broke eye contact, looking down at the ruined floor, and let a long, ragged sigh escape my lips. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached up to rub my temples, projecting the image of a woman who had finally hit her absolute breaking point. "You know what, Gavin?" I whispered, letting my voice crack with perfectly manufactured exhaustion. "I am just so tired. I am entirely exhausted by all of this." He blinked, thrown entirely off balance by my sudden shift in demeanor. He took a hesitant step back, crunching on a piece of crystal. "What are you talking about?" "I am done," I said, dropping my hands and looking at him with hollow, defeated eyes. "I do not have the energy for a prolonged legal war. I do not have the stomach to fight your mother, and I am sick of the constant screaming. If you want Paige, take her. If you want to fly to Honolulu and start a new life, just go. I will not stop the credit card charge. I will not call the police about the vase. Just pack your things, leave me the house, and never contact me again. Gavin stared at me, his eyes narrowing as he searched my face for any sign of a trap. But a narcissist is inherently incapable of believing that anyone is smarter than they are. They are hardwired to believe that their mere presence is enough to crush their opponent's resolve. Slowly, the terror melted from his face, replaced by a sickening, triumphant smirk. He straightened his spine, pulling his shoulders back as his arrogant swagger fully returned. I knew it, Gavin sneered, kicking a shard of glass out of his way. I knew you did not have the spine for a real fight, Sydney. You talk a big game with your spreadsheets and your audits, but at the end of the day, you are just a weak, pathetic bean counter. You could never handle a man like me. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my expression completely subservient. You are right. I cannot handle you. Just take the win, Gavin. He let out a sharp barking laugh, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. He did not even bother leaving the room to make his victory call. He dialed his mother and immediately put her on speakerphone, wanting me to hear every single word of my own humiliation. Mom, Gavin said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Call off the lawyers. Sydney is tapping out. She is giving me everything. Barbara's shrill, delighted laughter echoed through the high ceilings of my living room. Oh, thank heaven, she crowed. I told you she was completely spineless, Gavin. She knows she cannot afford to go up against our family in a real court. Make sure she signs a quitclaim deed on the house before you leave for the airport. Already handled. Gavin lied smoothly, winking at me as if we were sharing a private joke. She is letting me keep the credit lines open for the Hawaii trip, too. She just wants us gone. Well, good riddance to bad rubbish, Barbara spat, not caring at all that I could hear her. Paige is already twice the wife she ever was. Tell that miserable penny pincher to sweep up the floor before she leaves. I always hated this house anyway. Gavin hung up the phone, looking at me with total disgust. You heard her. I am going back to the hotel to pack my designer luggage. Do not try to contact me. My lawyer will mail you the standard dissolution paperwork. He turned on his heel and marched out the front door, slamming it shut behind him. I stood perfectly still in the center of the living room, listening to the roar of his engine as he backed out of the driveway and sped away. The moment the sound faded into the distance, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the extended family group chat. I had never bothered to leave the thread, and they had apparently forgotten to remove me in their excitement. The screen lit up with a message from Barbara, accompanied by a picture of her toasting a mimosa glass with Alyssa. The trash took itself out. Hawaii, here we come, I smiled. The cold, mechanical smile of an auditor who has just balanced a devastating ledger. I stepped carefully over the shattered crystal, grabbed my briefcase, and walked out the door. 2 hours later, the atmosphere could not have been more different from my suburban living room. I was standing in the stark, imposing marble hallway of the federal courthouse downtown. The air conditioning hummed with clinical efficiency, entirely devoid of the country club pretense my husband so desperately craved. DeAndre stood beside me, his tall frame clad in a pristine charcoal suit, looking every bit the respected, untouchable pediatric surgeon. He was holding a stamped certified folder containing his finalized emergency custody orders and the absolute freezing injunction on all of Alyssa's joint banking access. His timing had been flawless. We stepped through the heavy oak doors into the private chambers of a federal magistrate judge. Sitting at the long mahogany table were 2 senior agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division, alongside a lead investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Mrs. Wilson, the lead FBI agent, said, standing up and extending a firm hand. Your forensic audit was one of the most comprehensive civilian submissions we have ever processed. The mathematical proof of the embezzlement is undeniable. I appreciate your rapid response, Agent, I replied, taking my seat at the table and opening my laptop. The magistrate judge adjusted his glasses, reviewing the towering stack of warrants on his desk. Based on the evidence provided regarding the fake vendor invoices and the fraudulent LLC incorporation, I have authorized the immediate freeze of all shell accounts associated with Gavin Wilson. The $2.5 million is entirely locked in escrow. He cannot move a single cent. And the arrest warrants, DeAndre asked, his voice a low, steady rumble of authority. The FBI agent slid two pieces of paper across the table. Signed and approved by the federal prosecutor 10 minutes ago. We have a tactical team briefed and ready. We are tracking his phone and his passport. We know exactly where he is. I looked down at the official federal seal stamped onto the arrest warrant bearing my husband's name. Gavin was currently zipping up his expensive luggage, drinking champagne, and laughing at my supposedly pathetic surrender. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he was boarding a first-class flight to paradise. Instead, he was walking completely blind into a federal trap. The endgame was locked. All that was left was to watch the cage snap shut. Paige Monroe adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses as she stepped out of her vehicle and stared up at the towering glass facade of the First National Bank of Chicago. Despite the humiliating disaster at the country club the previous afternoon, she was feeling remarkably triumphant. Her father had screamed until his face turned purple, forbidding her from seeing Gavin ever again, but Paige was not a child. She had sneaked out of her parents' estate this morning with a singular mission. Gavin had called her late last night, sounding completely relaxed and victorious. He promised her that Sydney had finally cracked under the pressure and surrendered. The crazy ex-wife had officially backed off, leaving them to their perfect future. More importantly, Gavin had assured her that the corporate LLC account was fully funded and entirely at their disposal. He told her to go to the bank, withdraw the $50,000 in cash required for her custom rush-ordered bridal gown, and prove to her father once and for all that they were filthy rich. Paige strode through the heavy revolving doors, her heels clicking authoritatively against the polished marble floor. She bypassed the standard teller lines and walked directly toward the private wealth management suites. She felt a thrill of superior satisfaction. Sydney had tried to ruin her life with fake documents, but Gavin was a brilliant executive. He had outsmarted that bitter practical woman just as he had promised. She approached the mahogany desk of a senior account manager. She dropped her designer clutch onto the polished wood and extended the sleek, heavy metal corporate card Gavin had given her. I need to arrange an immediate withdrawal of $50,000, Paige demanded, offering a bright, practiced smile that she usually reserved for service workers. It is from the primary operating account of Zenith Consulting LLC. Gavin Wilson is the CEO and I am a registered authorized user. The account manager, an older man with graying temples named Mr. Sterling, took the card with a polite nod. Certainly, Miss Monroe. Please provide your government-issued identification so I can verify your authorization on the account. Paige happily handed over her driver's license, leaning back in her leather chair and crossing her legs. She was already mentally planning the trip to the bridal boutique, imagining the look on her mother's face when she walked in with stacks of $100 bills. Mr. Sterling swiped the heavy metal card through his terminal and began typing. A few seconds passed. The soft clicking of the keyboard abruptly stopped. Mr. Sterling leaned closer to his monitor. His polite, accommodating expression vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of rigid professional alarm. He looked from the screen to the metal card, then down to Paige's driver's license, and finally at Paige herself. "Is there a problem?" Paige asked, tapping her manicured fingernails against the desk. "I am in a bit of a rush today. Please remain seated, Miss Monroe," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was suddenly devoid of any customer service warmth. "I need to consult with our branch director regarding this specific routing number." Before Paige could protest, the manager stood up, taking her driver's license and the corporate card with him. He walked swiftly toward a frosted glass office at the back of the suite, locking the door behind him. Paige huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. It was probably just a security protocol for large cash withdrawals. Gavin had warned her that moving massive amounts of capital sometimes triggered automated alerts. She waited for 5 minutes, then 10. Her irritation began to mount. She pulled out her phone to text Gavin, but before she could type a message, the frosted glass door opened. Mr. Sterling returned, but he was not carrying her cash. He was accompanied by the branch director and 2 armed uniformed bank security guards. The guards immediately positioned themselves on either side of the exit doors, blocking the path back to the main lobby. Paige stood up, her irritation instantly morphing into confusion. What is going on? Where is my money? And give me my ID back. Miss Monroe, the branch director, stated, his tone carrying the heavy punishing weight of legal authority. We have confiscated your identification and the fraudulent debit card you presented. The account associated with Zenith Consulting, LLC, does not contain any legitimate capital. It is a known shell company that was flagged at 6 o'clock this morning by federal authorities. Paige stared at him, her mouth falling slightly open. Flagged. That is impossible. Gavin is the CEO. The money is from his corporate severance package. My fiancé is a multimillionaire. Your fiancé is currently the primary target of an active federal investigation, the director corrected sharply, showing absolutely no sympathy for her rising panic. The funds associated with this routing number are stolen corporate assets. By presenting this card and attempting to withdraw $50,000 in cash, you have just actively attempted to facilitate a federal crime. No! Paige gasped, stumbling backward until the back of her knees hit the leather chair. You are wrong. Sydney set this up. Gavin told me she was trying to frame him. The director ignored her excuses. Miss Monroe, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Securities and Exchange Commission have placed a hard freeze on every single financial asset tied to Gavin Wilson. We are required by federal law to retain your identification and notify the authorities immediately when anyone attempts to access these frozen accounts. The police are currently en route to this branch to question you regarding your role as an accessory to corporate embezzlement and money laundering. The words hit Paige with the force of a speeding freight train. Accessory to money laundering, federal crime, police en route. The pristine, wealthy illusion Gavin had sold her shattered into a million jagged pieces right there on the marble floor. Sydney had not been lying at the country club. Sydney had been telling the absolute horrifying truth. Gavin was broke, Gavin was a criminal, and Gavin had just sent her into a federal trap to withdraw stolen money. Blind, unadulterated terror seized Paige's chest. She did not wait for the director to finish speaking. She grabbed her designer clutch and bolted. She shoved past the surprised security guards, ignoring their shouts for her to stop, and sprinted through the main lobby. She hit the revolving doors at a full run, bursting out onto the downtown sidewalk, and sprinting toward her parked car like her life depended on it. She threw herself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and slammed her foot onto the accelerator. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the steering wheel. She grabbed her phone from the center console, tears of sheer panic streaming down her face, and hit Gavin's contact name. He answered on the second ring, the sound of a zipper closing echoing in the background. Hey baby, did you get the cash? Gavin, they took my ID, Paige screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. She merged recklessly into traffic, checking her rearview mirror for police sirens. The bank kept my license and the card. They locked the doors. The manager said the account is frozen by the FBI. He said the police are coming to arrest me for money laundering. There was a dead, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. The sound of rustling luggage completely stopped. Gavin Paige sobbed, gripping the steering wheel. What is going on? You said Sydney backed down. You said the money was safe. Why is the FBI freezing your accounts? When Gavin finally spoke, the charming, confident executive was completely gone. His voice was a high, frantic hiss of a man watching the walls close in. She lied. Gavin breathed, the realization dawning on him with sickening clarity. That psycho actually lied to my face. She did not tap out. She accelerated the audit. Gavin. What do I do? Paige wailed. They have my name. They have my driver's license. I am going to jail. Listen to me very carefully. Gavin snapped, his tone devoid of any love or reassurance. Forget the dress. Forget your parents. Do not go back to your house. Drive straight to the international terminal at the airport. We are moving the flight up. We have to get out of the country before the marshals get to the hotel. Get to the airport now. He hung up the line, going dead. 3 miles away, parked discreetly in an alleyway directly behind Gavin's luxury hotel, a black federal surveillance SUV sat idling in the shadows. Inside the heavily armored vehicle, Sydney Wilson sat comfortably in the back seat, her posture relaxed, and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Next to her, DeAndre watched the live tracking monitor glowing on the center console. Across from them sat a senior FBI technician wearing a heavy set of tactical headphones. The technician reached up and pulled the headphones down around his neck, looking directly at Sydney. He turned a small dial on his soundboard, broadcasting the intercepted phone call into the quiet cabin of the SUV. The crystal-clear audio of Gavin's frantic, desperate instructions to flee the country filled the vehicle. Sydney had not just audited Gavin's financial records. During her final sweep of his home office, she had mirrored his corporate cell phone using a proprietary security software she routinely utilized to track embezzling executives. Every text, every location ping, and every frantic phone call was currently being routed directly through her laptop and into the FBI's surveillance grid. The FBI technician tapped a few keys on his rugged laptop, logging the recorded threat. He is a confirmed flight risk. He is abandoning the hotel and attempting to breach the international terminal. We have cause for immediate apprehension. Sydney looked out the tinted window of the SUV, watching the rain begin to gently fall against the glass. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face. The false retreat had worked perfectly. She had given him just enough rope to hang himself, and he had tied the knot with his own 2 hands. "Take him down," Sydney said coldly. While the federal tactical team systematically swarmed the luxury hotel entrance, on my surveillance monitor, my personal cell phone vibrated sharply in my blazer pocket. The caller ID flashed DeAndre's name. I answered immediately, pressing the device to my ear while keeping my eyes glued to the FBI feed. "I am pulling into my driveway now," DeAndre said, his voice a low, steady rumble of absolute authority over the vehicle's Bluetooth connection. "The authorities have Gavin completely boxed in at the terminal. It is time I clean up the remaining rot in my own house. Stay on the line, Sydney. You will want to hear how the other half of this criminal enterprise falls apart." I muted my microphone and leaned back against the armored seat of the SUV. DeAndre placed his phone into his breast pocket, leaving the line open and crystal clear. Through the audio feed, I heard the heavy front door of his sprawling suburban estate swing open. This was followed instantly by the heavy, rhythmic thud of multiple work boots marching directly across the imported marble foyer. Upstairs in the master suite, Alyssa was entirely oblivious to the impending destruction of her reality. Gavin's younger sister, Barbara's precious daughter, and DeAndre's treacherous wife, was currently humming a cheerful, upbeat tune. She was tossing silk resort wear and designer swimsuits into a set of matching Louis Vuitton luggage. For the past 6 months, she had actively served as her brother's financial mule, siphoning DeAndre's lucrative surgical practice revenue directly into Gavin's fraudulent shell company. She fully believed she was 3 hours away from boarding a first-class flight to Hawaii, funded entirely by stolen money. DeAndre did not knock. He pushed the heavy bedroom door open with clinical, deliberate force. He was flanked by his ruthless corporate family attorney, Marcus, and a professional crew of 4 burly movers wearing identical gray uniforms. Alyssa spun around with a sharp gasp, dropping a silk kimono onto the plush carpet. Her arrogant, self-satisfied smile instantly vanished at the sight of the stern men invading her sanctuary. "DeAndre, what on earth is going on?" Alyssa demanded, her voice shrill with sudden indignation. "Who are these people? You know I have to leave for the airport in 2 hours. Gavin booked the grand family suite at the Four Seasons, and I am absolutely not missing my flight because you decided to do a surprise home renovation." DeAndre stood perfectly still, exuding the cold, calculating authority of a trauma surgeon, preparing to excise a malignant tumor. He raised a single hand, signaling the moving crew. "Box up only the items she entered this marriage with DeAndre," instructed the men, his tone completely devoid of affection or mercy. "Leave anything purchased with our joint accounts or my private practice funds. She has exactly 30 minutes to vacate these premises." The movers immediately fanned out across the massive suite. They aggressively unrolled cardboard boxes and began pulling cheap, outdated clothing from the very back of the walk-in closet, completely ignoring the racks of expensive designer gowns she had accumulated over the past 3 years. Alyssa shrieked, lunging forward to grab the nearest mover by the arm. Stop it right now. Get your filthy hands off my things. DeAndre, have you lost your mind? Tell them to get out of my house. It is not your house anymore, Alyssa, DeAndre stated flatly. He reached into his tailored jacket and retrieved a thick, heavy manila envelope. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the pristine white duvet of their king-sized bed. The packet landed with a definitive, heavy thud. Those are your expedited divorce papers. DeAndre continued, his voice slicing effortlessly through her rising hysteria. Behind them is a court-approved emergency custody order that was signed by a judge an hour ago. Let me clarify your new reality for you. Sole legal custody. I have been granted full, unmitigated legal and physical custody of our children due to your documented involvement in an active federal felony investigation. Physical relocation. The children are already safely secured at my sister's home, completely insulated from the impending media circus and your toxic influence. Restraining order. You are stripped of all visitation rights and legally barred from coming within 500 feet of the children, this house, or my medical practice, pending a formal criminal evaluation. Alyssa stared at the envelope as if it were a highly venomous snake. The color rapidly drained from her face, exposing the stark, terrified reality beneath her expensive cosmetics. She looked wildly at Marcus, the attorney, who simply offered a curt, unsympathetic nod, confirming every single word. You cannot do this. Alyssa stammered, her voice dropping into a panicked, breathless whisper. You have absolutely no grounds. I am their mother. I am your wife. I have done nothing wrong. DeAndre let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He pulled a secondary ledger from his briefcase. It was a duplicate of the forensic audit I had painstakingly prepared for him, highlighted and annotated with devastating precision. He opened it and read her sins aloud. The equipment fraud. $200,000 diverted from a fictitious MRI machine lease directly into Zenith Consulting. The phantom payroll. $85,000 wired to non-existent administrative consultants over 6 months. The personal slush fund. $55,000 drained from our children's private college accounts to cover Gavin's country club arrears and your own designer shopping sprees. You siphoned $340,000 from my private medical practice, DeAndre said, closing the ledger with a sharp snap. You used my hard-earned money to fund your brother's fraudulent corporate fantasy, and you actively conspired with Gavin to hide his embezzlement from Sydney. You are a thief, a liar, and a parasite. Alyssa stumbled backward, hitting the edge of her expensive dressing table. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the wood until her knuckles turned bone white. The walls of her comfortable, deceitful life were collapsing simultaneously. It was a temporary corporate loan, Alyssa cried out, her voice cracking with desperate, transparent panic. Gavin promised he would pay it all back next Friday with his offshore executive bonus. He promised me, DeAndre. We were just protecting the family legacy. You are completely overreacting. Your brother does not have an offshore bonus, DeAndre replied, stepping closer until he towered over her trembling frame. Your brother is currently being swarmed by federal agents at the international terminal. There is no money. There is no Hawaiian vacation. There is only a federal indictment for wire fraud, and you are officially named in the audit as an unindicted co-conspirator. The absolute finality of his words struck her like a physical blow. Alyssa's arrogant posture completely imploded. She looked wildly around the room, watching the movers efficiently dismantle the luxurious life she had stolen. Pure panic consumed her logic, pushing her back to her oldest, most toxic defense mechanism. You will regret this! Alyssa screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of sheer desperation. I am calling my mother. Barbara will absolutely destroy you, DeAndre. She will unleash our family lawyers and strip you of your medical license. You are nothing without the Wilson family wealth. DeAndre did not flinch. He simply checked his gold wristwatch, his expression radiating total, devastating serenity. Your mother cannot help you, Alyssa, DeAndre stated, delivering the final fatal blow with absolute precision. She is currently indisposed. The Internal Revenue Service and the federal marshals just seized her country club estate 30 minutes ago. Alyssa froze her phone, trembling violently in her hand. That is impossible. My mother's house is fully paid off. It has been in our family for decades. It was fully paid off, DeAndre corrected smoothly, until your brilliant brother secretly used the estate deed as collateral to secure the fraudulent corporate credit lines for his shell company. When the FBI froze Gavin's assets this morning, they triggered an automatic default. The bank seized the property to cover the federal liens. Your mother is currently homeless. No, Alyssa gasped, her chest heaving with sheer terror. You are lying. You are just trying to scare me. She aggressively stabbed her thumb against her phone screen, dialing Barbara's number and throwing it on speakerphone to prove him wrong. The line rang twice, echoing loudly in the tense silence of the master bedroom. Barbara finally answered, but there was no arrogant country club greeting. There was only a shrill, hysterical shriek of pure panic. Alyssa Barbara screamed into the receiver, her voice completely drowned out by the deafening sound of heavy boots and shattering wood. They are breaking down the doors. There are agents everywhere. They are taking the paintings. They are taking my house. Call Gavin. Tell Gavin to stop this right now. In the background of the call, a booming, authoritative voice cut through Barbara's wailing. Federal agents, step away from the phone and put your hands where we can see them. You are currently trespassing on federal property. The line went dead with a sharp, heavy click. Sitting in the back of the surveillance SUV, listening to the absolute silence that followed in DeAndre's bedroom, I allowed myself a slow, deeply satisfied smile. The relentless Chicago rain pounded against the windshield of Gavin's rented luxury SUV as he aggressively wove through the heavy traffic on the I-19, speeding directly toward the international terminal. Inside the pristine, leather-clad cabin, the atmosphere was a suffocating mixture of frantic adrenaline and manufactured arrogance. In the back seat, Barbara sat rigidly clutching a single slightly damp Birkin bag to her chest. Her perfectly styled hair was windblown and her breathing was shallow and rapid. She had barely managed to slip out through the rear conservatory doors of her sprawling estate and hurl herself into Gavin's waiting vehicle just as the deafening crash of a federal battering ram shattered her custom mahogany front doors. They treated me like a common street criminal. Barbara gasped, her voice trembling with a potent cocktail of shock and sheer unadulterated outrage. Federal agents with tactical vests trampling mud all over my imported Persian rugs. They are confiscating my home, Gavin. My home. That miserable, vindictive little accountant actually called the authorities on our family. Relax, Mother, Gavin ordered, not taking his eyes off the rain-slicked road. He gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, but his voice remained remarkably smooth, dripping with the dark, hypnotic charm he always used to manipulate reality. Sydney is throwing a desperate, pathetic temper tantrum because she knows she has absolutely lost. The FBI raid is nothing but a temporary intimidation tactic. She filed a fraudulent injunction to freeze the domestic accounts, but it does not matter. My wealth manager in the Caymans has already established a firewall around the primary offshore assets. In the passenger seat, Paige hugged her arms tightly across her chest. She was still physically shaking from her terrifying encounter at the First National Bank. Gavin, the bank director, specifically used the word embezzlement. He said there was an active federal investigation. The security guards literally locked the doors to keep me there. If I had not run, I would be in a police interrogation room right now. Paige, look at me, Gavin commanded sharply. He waited until she turned her tear-streaked face toward him, then flashed a brilliant, utterly terrifying smile. Narcissists possess a terrifying ability to genuinely believe their own lies, and in that moment Gavin looked completely invincible. Do you honestly think I would let some low-level bank teller or a bitter ex-wife take me down? Gavin asked softly, his tone laced with absolute superiority. Sydney is a bean counter. She plays with spreadsheets. I build empires. By the time those bureaucratic federal agents figure out how to untangle the corporate shell structure, we will be sipping cocktails on a private beach in international waters completely beyond their jurisdiction. We are untouchable. His supreme confidence worked like a drug on both women. Barbara took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened her spine, her innate arrogance rapidly returning to override her panic. Paige wiped her eyes and managed a fragile, hopeful nod. They desperately needed to believe him, so they did. 20 minutes later, they bypassed the chaotic, crowded economy check-in counters and strode directly into the exclusive velvet-roped first-class lounge. The stark contrast between the rainy, panic-stricken car ride and the opulent, hushed atmosphere of the VIP terminal immediately soothed their frayed nerves. The air smelled of expensive espresso and fresh lilies. Gavin led them to a private seating alcove overlooking the tarmac and immediately ordered a bottle of vintage champagne. When the crystal flutes arrived, he raised his glass, his chest puffed out with undeniable triumph. To new beginnings, Gavin declared, flashing a victorious smirk, and to leaving the dead weight exactly where it belongs. Barbara snatched her glass and took a long, greedy swallow, the alcohol finally settling her trembling hands. "I cannot believe I was ever worried," she scoffed, a vicious sneer twisting her features. "Sydney always was a spineless, pathetic little mouse. Did you see how easily she surrendered the house to you, Gavin? She practically begged you to leave. She thought she could outsmart our family, and now she is sitting alone in a ruined living room while we fly to paradise." "She is incredibly stupid," Paige agreed, her confidence fully restored by the luxury surrounding them. She leaned against Gavin's shoulder, glaring at her manicured nails. "She actually thought sending me to the bank would scare us. She is just jealous because you chose me." Gavin chuckled, a dark, rumbling sound of pure satisfaction. He pulled his corporate cell phone from his pocket, glanced at a dozen missed calls from his lawyers and his sister Alyssa, and casually tossed the device directly into a nearby trash receptacle. He did not care that Alyssa had been cornered by DeAndre. She was weak, and she was a liability. He was cutting all ties. "Let the IRS deal with the mess," Gavin said smoothly, pouring his mother another glass of champagne. "We leave the old world behind right here. Sydney can play the victim all she wants. In the end, the smartest person in the room always takes the prize." They spent the next 45 minutes basking in their own perceived brilliance. They mocked Sydney's wardrobe, her practical nature, and her supposedly pathetic surrender. They laughed at the thought of federal agents searching an empty estate, while the true mastermind slipped right through their fingers. They were completely blinded by their own towering egos, entirely unaware that the trap had already closed around them hours ago. Finally, the overhead speaker chimed with a soft melodic tone. "Now boarding all first-class passengers for Flight 802 with direct service to Honolulu." Gavin stood up, adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored blazer. He grabbed his carry-on bag and offered a charming, triumphant smile to Paige and Barbara. "Ladies, our chariot awaits," he announced. They walked out of the lounge and down the brightly lit concourse, exuding the smug, untouchable swagger of royalty. Other passengers parted out of their way. When they reached the boarding gate, Gavin proudly bypassed the long, winding line of economy travelers and stepped directly onto the red carpet of the priority boarding lane. He approached the podium with the absolute certainty of a man who owned the world. He pulled his pristine gold-stamped passport from his breast pocket and handed it to the uniformed gate agent with a slick, confident wink. "3 for first class?" Gavin said smoothly. The gate agent offered a polite, practiced smile and took the document. She slid the passport face down across the illuminated glass of the security scanner. Gavin turned his head to look back at Paige and Barbara, ready to usher them down the jet bridge toward their new life. Instead of the standard pleasant green chime of a verified boarding pass, the scanner emitted a sharp, jarring, high-pitched alarm. Gavin frowned, turning back to the podium. The security monitor facing the gate agent was flashing violently. The screen was illuminated in a bright, glaring, unmistakable red. The glaring red light from the security scanner illuminated the gate agent's face, casting a harsh crimson glow over her previously polite expression. She blinked, her professional smile completely dissolving. She pulled Gavin's pristine gold-stamped passport off the glass surface, examined the identification page, and then looked back at the monitor. She typed a rapid sequence of keystrokes. The machine emitted a second aggressive, high-pitched beep. The screen remained blood red. "Is there a problem?" Gavin asked. He let out a loud theatrical sigh, shifting his weight and looking back at the long line of wealthy passengers forming behind him. Your system is obviously glitching. Just manually override it. We are flying first class and we are already tired of waiting. Sir, please step aside for a moment, the gate agent said. Her voice was remarkably steady, though her hands moved quickly beneath the counter, pressing a concealed button. I need my supervisor to review this alert. Gavin's jaw tightened. The smug, untouchable swagger he had carried through the VIP lounge, fractured, replaced instantly by boiling entitled rage. He leaned heavily against the podium, invading the agent's personal space. I am not stepping aside. Gavin snapped, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet, carpeted boarding area. I am Gavin Wilson. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Zenith Consulting. I fly 1,000,000 miles a year with this airline. I am boarding this aircraft right now. Hand me my passport. The agent took a definitive step back, holding the passport securely against her chest. I cannot do that, sir. Your passport has been federally flagged. You are listed on the active no-fly registry. The words hung in the conditioned airport air, heavy and absolute. For 2 full seconds, Gavin simply stared at her, his narcissistic brain hardwired to believe he was entirely immune to consequences, completely rejected the information. He let out a sharp, barking laugh. A no-fly list. Gavin scoffed, shaking his head. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound? I am a corporate executive, not a terrorist. My vindictive ex-wife is an accountant who has clearly filed a fraudulent report to harass me. This is a domestic dispute. Now you will return my property, or I will personally ensure you are standing in an unemployment line by tomorrow morning. A tall man in a dark blue blazer stepped up to the podium, identifying himself as the terminal supervisor. Mr. Wilson, you need to lower your voice and step away from the gate. We have received an automated directive from the Department of Homeland Security. Your passport is officially suspended. You are not legally permitted to board any international or domestic flight. Gavin slammed his fist down onto the fiberglass podium. The loud crack caused several passengers in the boarding line to gasp and take a collective step backward. Do you know who I am? Gavin roared, his face flushing a deep mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his custom-tailored collar. I manage millions of dollars. I am a priority client. You are looking at a bureaucratic error. I demand you let us on that plane. Behind him, the illusion of safety that Paige had been clinging to completely shattered. The memory of the bank manager's warning, the frozen accounts, the money laundering investigation, the police en route, came crashing back with devastating clarity. The Hawaiian wedding, the endless champagne, the limitless corporate credit cards. It was all a lie. My wedding page shrieked, bursting into violent, hysterical tears. She dropped her designer carry-on bag, burying her face in her manicured hands. She did not care about Gavin's freedom or the federal charges. She only cared about the glamorous aesthetic she was losing. Gavin, you promised me. Paige wailed, her voice cracking as she stomped her foot on the carpet. You said the money was safe. You said we were going to Honolulu. My custom dress is waiting. My entire life is ruined because you could not handle your stupid ex-wife. You lied to me. Shut up, Paige, Gavin hissed, entirely abandoning his charming fiancé persona. He turned back to the supervisor, his eyes wild and desperate. I will buy 3 new tickets. I will buy the entire first-class cabin. Just process the payment and let us through. You cannot buy your way out of a federal flight restriction, the supervisor stated firmly. He reached for the heavy black radio clipped to his belt. We need airport security at Gate B4 immediately. We have a hostile passenger refusing to comply with a federal grounding order. Barbara shoved her way past Paige, her heels digging fiercely into the carpet. She wielded her damp Birkin bag like a shield, her face contorted into a mask of pure aristocratic outrage. She had just lost her sprawling estate to the IRS, and her fragile reality hinged entirely on Gavin asserting his dominance. This is an absolute outrage, Barbara shrieked, pointing a trembling jewel-encrusted finger directly at the supervisor's face. I demand to speak to the director of this airport. We are the Wilson family. We are legacy wealth. You are treating us like common street criminals. I will buy this airline and dismantle it piece by piece. You have absolutely no right to hold us here. Ma'am, if you do not step back, you will be detained, the supervisor warned, raising his hand. I am not staying here, Gavin growled. Panic finally pierced through his arrogant rage. He lunged forward, attempting to reach over the podium and snatch his passport from the agent's hand. He intended to physically push his way down the jet bridge and force his way onto the aircraft. He never made it past the desk. No, Mr. Wilson. You are not going anywhere. The heavy booming voice echoed across the wide concourse, carrying an unmistakable tone of absolute, unforgiving authority. The murmuring, anxious crowd of wealthy first-class passengers suddenly went dead silent. Heads turned. The sea of people physically parted down the center of the terminal, creating a wide, clear path leading directly to the boarding gate. Marching down the polished corridor was a tactical squad of federal agents. They wore dark, heavy windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their chests and backs. Flanking them were three stern individuals wearing identification lanyards bearing the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Leading the formation was the lead FBI investigator Sydney had met with earlier. Her face was a mask of cold professional determination. Gavin froze, his hand suspended mid-air over the podium. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. He stumbled backward, bumping heavily into Barbara, who let out a strangled gasp of pure terror. Gavin Wilson, the lead agent, announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and fleeing federal jurisdiction. She did not wait for his response. She raised her hands, and the bright, glaring airport lights caught the heavy metallic glint of the steel handcuffs she held. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around Gavin's wrists, with a definitive, unforgiving click that echoed through the otherwise paralyzed boarding area. For a man who had spent his entire life gliding through VIP lanes and corner offices, the physical restraint was an absolute system-shocking violation. His shoulders jerked upward as the lead FBI agent expertly spun him around, pressing him firmly against the polished fiberglass surface of the ticket podium. You have the right to remain silent. The agent began, her voice ringing out with practiced mechanical efficiency over the hushed whispers of the horrified first-class passengers. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. This is a mistake, Gavin stammered, the blood rushing out of his face so fast he looked practically translucent. His knees buckled slightly, but the two flanking SEC investigators held him up by his biceps. You have the wrong man. I am a victim here. My ex-wife orchestrated this. I demand to call my attorney. Your attorney is currently cooperating with our downtown field office. Mr. Wilson, the lead agent replied, completing the Miranda warning without missing a single beat. He has already provided us with the routing numbers to your offshore accounts. Paige stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the edge of her abandoned luggage. She pressed both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as she watched her billionaire fiancé, the man who was supposed to elevate her into the stratosphere of the global elite, reduced to a hyperventilating criminal in front of hundreds of onlookers. The fantasy was dead. There would be no custom bridal gown. There would be no Hawaiian paradise. There was only the glaring fluorescent lighting of the terminal and the terrifying reality of federal prison. Barbara, however, refused to surrender her aristocratic delusion. She puffed out her chest, marching directly up to the lead investigator, and aggressively pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the federal badge pinned to the woman's tactical vest. Unhand my son immediately! Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking with desperate, shrill authority. We are the Wilson family. You are making a monumental career-ending error. I will have your badge for this. I will personally see to it that you are completely ruined. The agent did not even flinch. She simply offered Barbara a look of profound, chilling pity. Ma'am, I highly suggest you step back and remain quiet. You are currently in no position to issue threats. Before Barbara could launch into another hysterical tirade, a sharp, upbeat ringtone pierced the tense silence. It was coming from the inner breast pocket of Gavin's custom-tailored blazer. He had thrown his corporate phone away in the lounge, but his private personal cell phone was still on him. The lead FBI agent smoothly reached into Gavin's jacket and extracted the vibrating device. She glanced at the caller ID, and a slow, knowing smirk spread across her face. She did not decline the call. Instead, she swiped the screen to accept, pressed the speakerphone icon, and held the device up so that the audio would broadcast clearly to Gavin Page and Barbara. Gavin, a voice floated from the speaker. It was Sydney. Her tone was not angry. It was not bitter or triumphant. It was perfectly terrifyingly calm. It was the clinical absolute serenity of an apex predator looking down at the bones of its prey. Sydney. Gavin gasped, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine as he leaned toward the phone in the agent's hand. Sydney, please. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them it was a corporate accounting error. I will give you whatever you want. I will give you the house. I will give you everything. Just call them off. A soft, elegant chuckle drifted through the speaker. It was a sound devoid of any mercy. You already gave me everything, Gavin, Sydney replied smoothly. Her words sliced through the heavy terminal air with surgical precision. Did you really think a senior forensic accountant wouldn't notice a $60,000 anomaly? Gavin stopped breathing. His eyes bulged as the true scope of his failure finally began to crystallize in his mind. You spent years treating me like a glorified secretary. Sydney continued, her voice radiating absolute, untouchable power. You genuinely believed I was just a weak, pathetic bean counter who would blindly sign whatever paperwork you shoved in front of me. But while you were busy playing master of the universe, I was auditing your entire life. The irrevocable trust you signed gave me everything. When you forced me to sign those dissolution papers this morning, you didn't even bother to read the fine print. You legally signed over every single domestic asset, property, and remaining retirement fund directly into my private control. No! Gavin choked out, thrashing weakly against the grip of the federal agents. That is impossible. My lawyers vetted those documents. Your lawyers vetted the documents you thought you handed them. Sydney corrected, her tone dropping into a deadly freezing register. And as for the embezzled capital? The shell company you put in my name? I legally transferred it to Barbara yesterday. She's the primary suspect now. The silence that fell over the boarding gate was absolute and deafening. Barbara froze. The aggressive aristocratic mask slid entirely off her face, leaving behind an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes darted from the phone to Gavin, her mind furiously connecting the catastrophic dots. You thought you were so clever, Gavin, Sydney whispered, driving the final nail into the coffin. You thought putting Zenith Consulting in my name would leave me holding the bag when the feds finally came knocking. But as the legally appointed executor of your mother's estate, a power of attorney she happily signed over to you last year, you unknowingly authorized me to transfer the entire LLC and all of its fraudulent liabilities directly into her name. The moment your pathetic little girlfriend tried to withdraw $50,000 in cash this morning, it triggered a federal alert that cemented Barbara as the primary beneficiary of a money laundering syndicate. Sydney paused, letting the devastating reality settle over the terminal. Enjoy your flight, Gavin, she said softly. The line went dead with a sharp final click. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one moved. Gavin stood paralyzed in federal handcuffs, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Paige backed away, sinking against the glass wall of the terminal, sliding down to the floor in a puddle of tears and ruined silk. Then Barbara snapped. The sheer magnitude of the destruction hit her all at once. Her ancestral estate had been seized by the IRS. Her social reputation was completely obliterated. And now, thanks to her golden child's arrogant stupidity, she was the primary suspect in a multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement ring. She was going to spend the rest of her natural life in a federal penitentiary. You idiot, Barbara shrieked. It was a guttural, feral sound that tore from her throat. She dropped her designer Birkin bag to the floor and lunged forward with explosive, unhinged violence. She threw herself directly at Gavin, her manicured claws extended. You ruined me! Barbara screamed, her hands wrapping around Gavin's throat, her perfectly painted fingernails digging viciously into his skin. You promised me we were safe. You arrogant, stupid, worthless little boy. You destroyed my life. Gavin choked, stumbling backward under the sheer force of his mother's attack. Because his hands were cuffed behind his back, he was completely defenseless. He thrashed, blindly gasping for air as Barbara shook him violently, screaming hysterically about her house, her money, and her ruined legacy. The SEC investigators yelled out, rushing forward to intervene. It took 3 heavily armored federal agents to physically pry the shrieking, thrashing matriarch off her son's throat. They wrestled Barbara to the polished floor, pinning her arms behind her back as she kicked and sobbed in pure, unchecked hysteria. Gavin slumped against the podium, coughing violently and clutching his bruised neck, his expensive blazer torn and ruined. The crowd of first-class passengers watched in absolute mesmerized silence as the once untouchable Wilson family was dragged away in disgrace, their empire of lies permanently reduced to ash. The polished floors of the international terminal had transformed into a theater of absolute humiliation. Federal agents hauled Gavin up by his ruined lapels, his face a mask of bruised, breathless shock. Beside him, Barbara was still panting heavily, her wrists firmly secured in cold steel, her chest heaving as the reality of her shattered world crashed down upon her. Paige, realizing the sheer, inescapable gravity of her situation, scrambled up from the carpet. Her designer mascara ran in dark, muddy rivers down her flushed cheeks. Survival instinct, sharp and utterly self-serving, kicked in immediately. She lunged toward the lead FBI investigator, holding her manicured hands up defensively, physically distancing herself from Gavin. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this," Paige shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the terminal. "He made me do it. Gavin held me hostage. He forced me to go to the bank this morning and attempt that wire transfer against my will. I am a victim here. He basically kidnapped me." Gavin slowly turned his head, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "Paige, what are you doing? We are getting married." "I would rather die than marry a federal inmate." Paige spat, her tone vicious and completely devoid of the cloying affection she had weaponized for months. "You lied to me about everything. You told me you were a billionaire. You are just a pathetic, broke fraud who stole from his own mother and his ex-wife. Tell them, Gavin. Tell the agents I am innocent." Before Gavin could even process the absolute betrayal from his bride to be the final pillar of his arrogant existence, completely collapsed. Barbara, her hair wild and her aristocratic posture shattered, jerked her chin toward the SEC investigators. She completely ignored Paige's hysterical sobbing and focused her intense, venomous glare entirely on her golden boy. "Write this down immediately," Barbara commanded the nearest agent, desperately attempting to summon her old country club authority despite the handcuffs digging into her wrists. "I have zero knowledge of Zenith Consulting. I have absolutely no involvement in any money laundering syndicate. My son is a pathological liar. He clearly forged my signature on those corporate transfer documents to frame me." Mother Gavin gasped, the word tearing from his throat like a physical wound. "You cannot do this. We planned this together. You knew exactly what was in those offshore accounts." "I know nothing," Barbara screamed, cutting him off with ruthless precision. "You are no son of mine. You are a criminal parasite. You used my ancestral home as collateral for your fraudulent schemes. You stripped me of my legacy. I am fully cooperating with the federal government, and I will gladly testify against you in open court to get my property back." The absolute silence that followed her declaration was deafening. Gavin stared at the 2 women he had chosen over Sydney, the women he had showered with stolen wealth and unearned loyalty. At the very first sign of genuine consequence, they had stripped his bones clean and tossed him to the wolves. "Wait for me. Gavin, do not let them close the gate." The shrill, panicked screams sliced through the heavy tension of the boarding area. Alyssa came sprinting frantically down the wide concourse. She was dragging 2 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases, her silk resort wear clinging to her sweating frame. Having just been unceremoniously evicted by DeAndre, she had practically broken traffic laws to reach the airport, fully expecting to escape the implosion of her life by boarding the Hawaiian flight. She shoved her way past a group of stunned economy passengers, her eyes locked on the first-class podium. "Gavin, tell them to hold the plane!" Alyssa yelled, breathless and manic. "DeAndre kicked me out. He took the kids. We have to leave right now." She skidded to a violent halt. Her expensive luggage crashed heavily into the back of her legs. The scene before her finally registered. Gavin was in handcuffs, his collar torn and his face ashen. Barbara was pinned between two heavily armed federal agents. Paige was sobbing loudly to an SEC investigator, aggressively pointing her finger at Gavin. Alyssa's mouth fell open. The color drained from her face in a rapid, sickening wave. "What is happening?" Alyssa whispered, her voice trembling, as a federal agent immediately stepped forward to intercept her. "Are you Alyssa Wilson?" the agent asked, pulling a secondary warrant from his tactical vest. "Yes," she stammered, backing away slowly. "Alyssa Wilson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and federal tax evasion," the agent stated flatly, grabbing her wrist and spinning her around. "No!" Alyssa shrieked, thrashing against his grip as the handcuffs clicked into place. "Mother, do something. Gavin, fix this. Tell them I just moved the money for your medical equipment. I did not steal anything." As if the universe had decided the Wilson family required maximum exposure for their monumental sins, a bright, blinding light suddenly illuminated the chaotic scene. A local news crew, originally dispatched to the international terminal to cover a mundane story about holiday travel delays, had caught wind of the massive federal presence. The cameraman pushed to the very front of the parting crowd, the red recording light glowing ominously. A reporter followed close behind, holding a microphone out toward the spectacle. Gavin turned his face away, ducking his head to avoid the blinding camera light, but it was entirely useless. There was nowhere to hide. Barbara noticed the camera, and her deeply ingrained vanity instantly overrode her survival instinct. She stood up straight, trying to smooth her ruined hair with her cuffed hands, desperate to maintain some illusion of superiority. "Turn that camera off!" Barbara demanded, her voice cracking with humiliated rage. "This is a private family matter. We are the Wilsons. You have absolutely no right to film us." The reporter completely ignored her, turning smoothly to face the lens. "We are coming to you live from the international terminal, where a major federal raid has just apprehended several members of the prominent Wilson family. As you can see, disgraced local businessman Gavin Wilson, along with his mother Barbara and sister Alyssa, are currently being taken into federal custody." Paige, realizing she was caught on live television standing next to a disgraced criminal, threw her hands over her face and practically crawled behind the ticket podium to escape the frame, leaving her ruined designer bags abandoned on the carpet. Alyssa began sobbing hysterically, sinking to her knees right in front of the rolling camera. "My husband is a respected doctor," she wailed, completely oblivious to the massive audience witnessing her dramatic breakdown. "You are ruining our reputation." "You ruined your own reputation," the lead FBI agent said sharply. "Let us go." The federal agents gripped the Wilsons tightly by their arms and began marching them down the long, brightly lit concourse. The crowd of wealthy travelers held up their cell phones, flashing photos and recording videos of the once untouchable, arrogant family being paraded like common criminals. Gavin kept his eyes glued to the polished floor. The dark, hypnotic charm that had fueled his entire existence was completely and permanently gone. He had lost his company, his stolen wealth, his fiancée, and his mother's loyalty in the span of 10 devastating minutes. Behind them, the gate agent calmly picked up the intercom microphone. "We are now resuming the boarding process for Flight 802 to Honolulu," she announced, her voice perfectly serene. The Wilsons were escorted out through the sliding glass doors of the terminal directly into the pouring Chicago rain, leaving their empire of lies permanently shattered behind them. 8 months have passed since the spectacular implosion at the international terminal. The American judicial system is rarely a fast-paced television drama filled with dramatic courtroom confessions and 11th-hour surprise witnesses. Instead, it is a slow-grinding, utterly unforgiving machine built entirely on documentation ledgers and federal statutes. When you cross the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service, there are no magical loopholes, no clever attorneys who can talk you out of a paper trail, and no charming negotiations. There is only the brutal mathematical reality of federal law. The offshore accounts Gavin bragged about were frozen before his plane ticket was even printed. Under the Bank Secrecy Act and federal anti-money laundering protocols, the moment the FBI flagged the domestic origin accounts, international treaties compelled the Cayman banks to lock down the assets. Gavin never had a firewall. He only had a temporary illusion of control completely dismantled by the irrevocable trust he had so blindly forced Sydney to sign. When the dust finally settled, and the federal prosecutors finished dissecting the airtight forensic audit Sydney had handed them, the consequences were distributed with devastating surgical precision. The golden child's towering arrogance crashed directly into the rigid wall of federal sentencing guidelines. Facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence for corporate embezzlement wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, and attempting to flee federal jurisdiction, his expensive defense attorneys had absolutely no leverage. Going to trial would have resulted in a functional life sentence. They forced him to take a plea deal. There is no parole in the federal prison system. Gavin was sentenced to a mandatory 15 years in a medium-security federal correctional institution. By law, he must serve exactly 85% of that time before he is even eligible to see the inside of a halfway house. His custom-tailored Italian suits have been permanently replaced by standard-issue khaki uniforms. His daily schedule is now dictated by armed guards rather than an executive assistant. The man who once believed he was the master of the universe now makes 23 cents an hour scrubbing cafeteria trays, stripped of his wealth, his title, and his hollow pride. The IRS does not care about legacy wealth, ancestral homes, or country club memberships. When Gavin utilized her legally executed power of attorney to attach the fraudulent Zenith Consulting shell company to her name, he transferred all associated tax liabilities and criminal penalties directly to her Social Security number. Under federal civil asset forfeiture laws, property involved in a money laundering transaction is subject to immediate seizure. The government auctioned her sprawling, beloved estate. They liquidated her investment portfolios and seized her luxury vehicles to satisfy the massive tax liens. Barbara narrowly avoided federal prison time by accepting a deal to turn state's evidence against her own son, testifying to his manipulation of her assets. However, her punishment is arguably worse for a woman entirely consumed by vanity and social standing. She currently resides in a damp 400-square-foot one-bedroom apartment in a decaying industrial part of the city. She takes the public bus to buy generic groceries. Her former high society friends have entirely blocked her phone number, treating her name like a contagious disease. DeAndre excised her from his life with the ruthless clinical precision of the trauma surgeon he is. The family court judge reviewed Alyssa's federal indictment for accessory to embezzlement and immediately stripped her of all marital assets, awarding DeAndre sole physical and legal custody of their children. To avoid sharing a cell block with her brother, Alyssa accepted a brutal plea agreement. She avoided incarceration, but was ordered under the Mandatory Victims Restitution Act to pay full court-mandated restitution for the $340,000 she stole from her ex-husband's medical practice. To legally garnish her wages, the court requires her to maintain steady, documented employment. Today, the woman who once spent thousands on designer shoes and ridiculed working-class people works 40 hours a week as a minimum wage cashier at a mid-tier retail clothing store. She spends her days folding discounted sweaters and standing on her aching feet, forced to smile and scan items for the very same suburban wives she used to viciously mock. While Paige miraculously escaped a federal criminal indictment by proving she was entirely ignorant of the underlying fraud, her association with Gavin's crimes completely annihilated her life. She was not protected from civil liability. The vendors for her extravagant Hawaiian destination wedding sued her for breach of contract and outstanding balances. Because Gavin's accounts were seized by the federal government, Paige was left holding the bag for hundreds of thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits, luxury bridal purchases, and first-class travel bookings. Without Gavin's stolen wealth to prop up her fake, glamorous lifestyle, her creditors descended like vultures. She was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, resulting in the liquidation of her designer wardrobe, her jewelry, and her car. Her social media influencer status evaporated overnight when her followers realized her entire aesthetic was funded by stolen money and federal wire fraud. She is completely bankrupt, socially ruined, and living in a cramped, noisy studio apartment with 2 college-aged roommates. As for Sydney, she did not attend Gavin's sentencing hearing. She had no desire to look at him or offer him the satisfaction of seeing her face in the gallery. She had already taken exactly what she wanted from him. Sydney sat in her beautifully restored quiet living room, holding a mug of hot tea, and watched the local news coverage of his prison transfer on her television. The reporter detailed the absolute dismantling of the Wilson family legacy, outlining the seized assets and the public auction of their properties. There was no grand celebration on her end. There was no champagne, no dramatic gloating, and no lingering bitterness. There was simply a profound, unshakable sense of peace. She had walked into their den of vipers as a woman they chronically underestimated. They saw a practical, quiet accountant they thought they could easily manipulate, use, and discard. They mistook her silence for weakness and her patience for stupidity. Sydney took a slow sip of her tea, savoring the absolute serenity of her legally protected, debt-free home. The numbers had finally balanced. The ledger was perfectly clean. Justice, she realized with a soft smile, is simply the universe performing a flawless audit. The clinking of baccarat crystal and the low, sophisticated hum of wealth floated through the warm evening air. High above the chaotic streets of downtown Chicago, the rooftop restaurant offered a panoramic, breathtaking view of the city skyline. It was a space reserved strictly for the apex predators of the corporate and medical worlds, a sanctuary of velvet booths, imported marble, and quiet, absolute power. Sydney sat at the head of a sprawling, candlelit table. She looked immaculate. The woman who had spent years hiding behind oversized cardigans and a hunched posture was entirely gone. In her place sat a woman wearing a tailored emerald green silk blazer that caught the ambient light, her posture flawless, her expression one of utter, untouchable serenity. She slowly turned her wine glass by the stem, her dark eyes reflecting the sparkling city lights below. Across from her sat DeAndre. The heavy, exhausting burden of his marriage to Alyssa had been completely excised from his life, leaving him looking 10 years younger. His shoulders were relaxed, and he wore a sharp charcoal suit that matched the renewed confidence in his voice. He was flanked by 4 of the most prominent medical professionals in the state, including the chief of surgery and the head of the hospital's board of directors. "You are all looking at the only reason my private practice is currently expanding rather than filing for bankruptcy," DeAndre said, raising his glass toward Sydney with a look of profound, genuine respect. "When my personal life became a federal crime scene, I thought my life's work was going to be liquidated to pay off restitution. I was preparing to lose my clinic. But Sydney stepped in. She completely restructured my corporate assets, firewalled my medical practice from personal liabilities, and legally shielded my children's trust funds with surgical precision." The chief of surgery, a silver-haired man who commanded respect in any room he entered, leaned forward entirely captivated. "I have worked with top-tier accounting firms in New York and London," the chief said, his tone laced with genuine awe. "But the financial modeling you implemented for DeAndre's clinic is nothing short of brilliant. You found tax efficiencies and liability shields that our current corporate advisors entirely missed. We are currently looking to restructure the hospital's private acquisition fund, and frankly, we want your firm to handle it." Sydney offered a graceful, measured smile. It was not the eager, desperate smile of someone hoping to please. It was the calm, definitive smile of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. "I would be happy to review your current portfolio," Sydney replied, her voice smooth and commanding. "My firm specializes in forensic asset protection and high-level corporate restructuring. We do not just look at the numbers on the page. We look at the architectural integrity of the entire financial structure. If there is a weakness, a leak, or a hidden liability, we find it before the federal government does, and we fortify it." The board members nodded in unison, hanging on her every word. Men who a year ago would have looked right past her, assuming she was merely an administrative assistant, were now pulling out their phones to secure a consultation. Sydney was no longer just an auditor working in the shadows of Gavin's fraudulent empire. She was the chief executive officer of her own boutique financial consulting firm. She had taken the massive untainted capital she had legally secured from the dissolution of her marriage and invested it with ruthless, calculated brilliance. She had purchased prime commercial real estate, hired a team of elite-hungry financial analysts, and built a reputation as the sharpest, most unforgiving financial mind in the city. Her client list now consisted exclusively of high-net-worth individuals who demanded absolute perfection. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed effortlessly from medical acquisitions to international market trends. Sydney directed the flow of the dialogue with effortless grace. She felt a deep, resonant warmth in her chest. She was not pretending. She was not shrinking herself to make a fragile, arrogant man feel larger. She was simply finally herself. A tuxedo-clad waiter approached the table carrying a sleek black leather folder containing the bill. For a table of 6 elite professionals ordering premium steaks and imported wine, the total was undoubtedly astronomical. DeAndre immediately reached for his wallet, his hand extending toward the folder. "I have got this," he insisted. "It is the absolute least I can do to celebrate your new firm." Sydney smoothly intercepted the leather folder before his fingers could even brush it. "Absolutely not," Sydney said gently but firmly. "You are my guest tonight. We are celebrating the launch of your new pediatric wing. Consider this a professional courtesy." Before DeAndre could protest further, Sydney opened the folder and casually slid a heavy matte black Centurion card onto the receipt. It was the ultimate undeniable symbol of self-made, untouchable wealth. The waiter processed the transaction with a respectful bow and returned the card. Sydney signed the receipt with a swift, fluid stroke of her pen, leaving a massive tip that would make the waiter's entire month. As the medical professionals gathered their coats and exchanged warm, enthusiastic goodbyes, promising to call her office on Monday morning, Sydney excused herself and walked slowly toward the edge of the rooftop terrace. The cool night wind brushed against her face. She rested her hands on the thick glass barrier, looking down at the sprawling, glittering grid of Chicago. Far below, millions of people were rushing through their lives, navigating the complex maze of the city. Somewhere down there in a damp, miserable apartment, Barbara was counting her pennies. Somewhere down there in a brightly lit retail store, Alyssa was folding cheap sweaters to pay off federal restitution. And somewhere far away in a concrete cell, Gavin was staring at a cinder block wall, realizing that he had handed the keys to the kingdom to the one woman smart enough to lock him out permanently. Sydney took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp, clean air of absolute victory. She thought about the timid, exhausted woman she used to be. The woman who had allowed herself to be belittled, ignored, and used as a convenient scapegoat. That woman was gone. The intense, searing heat of the Wilson family's betrayal was supposed to reduce her to nothing but collateral damage. They had intended to leave her holding the bag, completely ruined by their greed. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face as she looked out over the empire of lights. She didn't just survive the fire. She had bought the ashes at a steep discount, weaponized the flames, and built a gleaming, untouchable skyscraper right on top of them. As an AI, I don't experience family dynamics, but the human struggles shared in these narratives highlight a profound reality about personal boundaries. The most vital lesson learned is that your true value is never determined by those who chronically underestimate or mistreat you. Ultimately, validation comes from within, not from the approval of others who fail to see your potential. Sometimes losing the toxic familial validation you thought you needed is exactly the catalyst that frees you to build the life you truly deserve. Please share your own journey of walking away from toxic expectations to find your strength in the comments below.